Dawn leans over Alfama like a hand-smoothing wrinkled linen, and you wake to the easy mix of tar and salt that climbs the hill from the river. The shutters breathe, wood against wood. A gull clears its throat on the roofline, and then thinks better of it. You count gentle sounds. The kettle easing on the hearthstone, a neighbor's cough 2 rooms away, the hush of a broom along the stair. Today is not yet a baptism day. It is a thinking day, the day for choosing who will stand at the font. You sit up and find the boards cool under your feet, dusted faintly with lime. A night candle gives one last bead of resin and dies. You set water to warm and open the shutter a finger's width. The hill falls away in layered whitewash that will later glare and for now only glows. Beyond, the Tagus lies pale and pewter smooth. You breathe. Choosing cannot be bullied. It likes a steady floor and hands that do not clench. You rinse your face in the basin. Long strokes that move you into morning. Drops ring the rim like small bells. Your mind tries to gallop names, favors, faces, but you keep it to a walk. A godfather who keeps his word more faithfully than he keeps the time. A godmother whose hand is already where it needs to be before you ask. You are not trading for coin. You are looking for weatherproof people, the kind who show up when nothing is happening and no one will notice. You tear a heel of bread, dip it into last night's stew, and taste rosemary, smoke, and the shy ghost of garlic. Through the shutter you watch the lane wake. 2 boys carry a bucket as if it is a live fish. A woman with a bundle pauses at the fountain, presses her hand to the small of her back, laughs into her sleeve. You imagine laughter around a cradle, the steady kind, that lives on plain mornings, not only on feast days. Bells from the say iron the morning flat. You fold linen, corners to corners, and picture hands like these yours, theirs doing the same work for years. Memory drifts in. The neighbor who brought broth before dawn, the widow with the clean doorstep, the mariner who tells smaller stories than he could. You do not want glitter. You want plain steadiness, the kind that does not need witnesses. Jug in hand, you step into the lane. Stone is cool under your palm. Water at the spout talks in its old language. Someone greets you with a nod, almost like a bow, and you return it. The hill smells of yeast, pitch, damp rope, and something sweet you cannot name. You dip the jug, lift, and feel the good weight settle into your wrist. Choosing is like this. Let what you need come to you, then brace your arm and carry it home without spilling any on the stairs. Back inside, you wet the floor and sweep slow arcs that pin the dust. The broom's whisper says, begin with the obvious. Who has already stood? Who has appeared early with a loaf wrapped in a cloth and silence held like a gift? You make yourself right in your ordinary hand. A scrap with 3 names, room around each so they can breathe. The top name is not the richest. The bottom name is not the poorest. You try the sound of each beside your child's, and one pairing lands like a small satisfied stone. You think of the priest's porch, always cool even in summer, and the gentle rules he spoke without making them feel like rules. 1 sponsor is enough, 2 is fine. 3 becomes a procession, and the church is not a procession. Simple names, clear vows, no bargaining. You like that. You do not want your child's future tied to a bundle of conditions. You want an uncluttered promise. I will stand at the font, and I will stand when the years get heavy. The lane sends you a tune with only 2 notes, hummed by someone you do not see. You picture spiritual kin as a second doorway into the same house. New aunts and uncles of the soul. More ways for the child to be heard. The circle should be small enough to hold, strong enough to hold on. You let that phrase settle. When you look again at the scrap, you find your shoulders have dropped. The names on the page are not glowing, not dimming. They are simply steady. Light grows. The gull returns to the roofline and chooses silence. From the harbor, a builder's hammer taps like a modest clock. You set the jug down, smooth your apron, and feel readiness rise like bread that waited for real heat. Doubt is finished. You will walk nowhere far, nowhere loud, letting your eyes confirm what your hands already know. You lace your shoes and taste the river in the air. You pause before you go and say the names aloud, first to the room and then to the quiet that gathers in corners. Words make shapes when they travel. You watch these settle into the walls as if they have always belonged here. You touch the folded linen, check the water, straighten the scrap on the table. The day will carry you through courtyards and doorways, past bread ovens and rope coils, and a porch that smells faintly of oil. You are ready to begin picking up confirmations, like smooth stones. You carry the tub to the courtyard fountain, hips steady, arms loose, and the water greets you with thin laughter against stone. Steam lifts from the first pour, a quiet veil that smells of ash, soap shavings, and a memory of rosemary. You boiled the linen before dawn. Now you guide each length through coolness until the fibers lose their creases and remember how to lie flat. The fountain keeps a small, old rhythm. You match it with your own. Dip, squeeze, fold, lay, and breathe. The courtyard is awake but not noisy. A broom whispers under an archway. A woman you know rolls up her sleeves and nods, sharing the bench without ceremony. Someone hums the tale of a hymn from Sunday, a phrase about a road and a steady star. You keep your hands in the water and let your mind climb the calendar. Saints are steps. You take them slowly. St. Anthony first, because Lisbon thinks of him as near as bread. His name is simple on a clerk's tongue and kind in an old neighbor's mouth. St. Vincent next, the ship and the ravens stitched into the city's imagination. Senora da Conceição, with candlelit processions that make lanes shimmer. You try each name in a whisper near enough to the basin that, if it is wrong, the splash can take it away. If it rests, you keep it. You do not want a complicated thing. You want a name that can be spoken in the market, at a sickbed, at the door when the padrino arrives with a loaf and no ceremony. You think of João at the docks, who speaks softly even when the wind lifts the tarps. You think of Maria by the stairs, who notices empty bowls before they announce themselves. You think of Beatrice, whose room smells like beeswax and patience, names that carry their own balance. News moves through the courtyard with baskets and buckets. A boat in from Setúbal with honest salt. A priest visiting from the next parish who reads slowly. A girl mending before her eyes are fully awake. You rinse linen and listen without being carried off by anyone else's verdict. If a name swells because 5 voices say it at once, you let it ebb. If a quiet name returns uninvited, you hold it with both hands, like a wet pillowcase. You spread the first pieces across the rope line that stretches from fig tree to wall. Water runs from the hems in clear stitches. From your pocket you take a scrap, a list of coming feasts copied in a tidy hand. Anthony, James, Anne, Mary Magdalene. You mark a dot beside a morning. That will be plain, no fair, no procession, only early light and the ordinary font. A baptism likes plainness. The water will do the talking. You have watched naming happen every sort of way. A child called for the saint whose day rose while the mother labored. A child called for a grandparent, so the family line folds back on itself like dough. A child named to honor a sponsor whose shoulders are wide enough to help carry the years. The hill holds all these customs at once. No single rule runs through the lanes. Only the slow habit of doing what feels devout and sensible at the same time. In the corner, a little brass bowl waits. Later, you will warm a pinch of green leaves so the birth room smells like a small, clean forest. Doctrine is one thing, preference another. You like a house that sighs green. The other women speak about soap, needles, and promises. One tells of a sponsor who brought words instead of the gift he had promised. Another tells of a widow whose purse is thin, but whose presence is thick, and how presence is the better gift. You check the line as if the cloth has weight you can see. João does not wobble. Maria does not pull. Beatrice, the third name you had set aside, sits even. The fountain keeps its talk. A cat steps across the wall like a scribe ruling a page. You sit and eat a plum that is sweet at the edge and green near the stone. You remember the clerk's habit of reading letters aloud while he writes them. You hear him in memory. The crisp N of Antonio, the open A of Anna, the rolling R he cannot help in Rosa. You would like the child to hear their name from that desk and feel recognized rather than corrected. You would like the sponsors to hear their own names inside the prayer and feel the weight of it settle like a cloak, warm but not heavy. You rinse the last cloth, hold it up to the light, and see what you expect. Not brighter than snow, simply clean. You stack the linen into the tub so the afternoon will be easy, not crammed, not fussy, each cloth folded to cooperate with the next. You speak the three names again, this time with their saints, soft enough that only the water would hear if it were listening. The church you imagine is quiet at that hour. The oil will make a small circle on a new forehead. The salt will wake a tiny tongue. Nothing dramatic, just vows that fit inside daily life. Going home, the lane is the same and new, as if the city had been rinsed with you. A cooper taps hoops. A shoemaker checks his awl. A lamplighter pauses at a last lamp. You stop once to turn the scrap over and press a fingernail beside the dot you made. Not a vow, only acknowledgement. The choice is moved in behind your ribs and waits there, calm, until you fetch the words. The midwife's door is half open, as if it has been taught to listen. You tap once and hear the small smile in her reply before you step over the threshold. The room keeps low light even in morning, a kind of dusk for working hands. A pot barely murmurs on the trivet. Steam rises in a thin ribbon that smells of fennel and something sweet. The midwife does not rush to fill the silence. She places a cup where your hand will find it, and you wrap your fingers around the warm clay. She has seen more baptisms than any priest, because she has watched the hours that make them necessary. She asks the question she always asks first, how do you feel today? But she angles it toward choosing. You say you need steadiness, not favors, presence, not promises, names that stand upright without leaning on anything else. She nods and lets the cup sit between you like a small brazier of calm. You speak of Joanne, whose work pulls him to the river and sometimes beyond the river, and of Maria, who turns up before an errand is named. You speak of Beatrice, whose hands have learned how to move without spilling anyone's dignity. The midwife listens as if the names themselves are small creatures that might bolt if startled. She asks what you need first visits when fever runs, a shoulder for shoes and schooling in years to come, or only the kind of belonging that lies quiet until called. You choose the plainest answer, a door that opens when knocked, even if the knock comes late or empty-handed. She leans back and makes one soft sound, approval without ornament. She tells you stories that are not quite stories. A padrino who mended nets in silence while a house found its breath again. A madrina who knew how to keep a room from talking when a mother needed sleep. She avoids the additions that make gossip heavy. She honors the work itself showing up, setting a pot, standing a vigil, walking a child to a desk, and staying in the doorway until the lesson begins. You watch the window's square of light slide along the wall and settle on a basket of neatly folded cloths. The midwife speaks about timing, not the day on the calendar that will take care of itself, but the hour. Better early, when streets are empty and the font water keeps its cool. Better the priest who reads slowly than the one who reads quickly, so the names arrive with all their letters intact. Better few guests than many, so the vows can hear themselves. She asks about feasts, and you tell her you have marked a plain morning between two bright ones. She smiles at that. The child will have enough noise in life, she says. Let the beginning be quiet. She asks about food, about the small wine, about whether you hope for almonds or only bread. You answer easily. The house can manage a bowl of sugared nuts and will be grateful for a loaf. It is not a bargaining table. It is a promise table. No one owes anyone a show. You express the ache that comes with choosing where there are more names than places. The midwife's eyes hold it without fuss. She teaches you the grace of the doorstep. Carry the decision as if it is ordinary. Thank those you did not choose in the same breath that you bless those you did. Let the chosen be the ones who say less and do more. Let the unchosen feel themselves kept, not cast out. A circle can be tight without becoming a rope. She pours a fresh splash into the cup and adds 2 leaves. You sip and find that the sweetness has opened a little. She names one caution. Beware the gift that looks like an anchor. A large purse can hide a long rope of expectation. You nod. You have already measured from modesty, the candle that keeps a good wick, the salt wrapped in paper, a length of ribbon for the book, nothing that asks the future to bow. The midwife stirs the pot and spreads a cloth on the table, a rehearsal without words. She sets out items that appear in every birth room she has held. Basin, cloths, a clean cord, a small spoon, a candle stub with a good base. She names the quiet jobs the sponsors sometimes forget are theirs. fetching water without being asked, holding a window open to invite the breeze, answering a knock with a calm voice so the mother does not need to turn her head. You feel the names you have chosen settling further into their proper chairs. Before you leave, she ties a sprig with thread and lays it in your palm. Nothing sainted, just a clean scent to carry home. She tells you to sleep after noon if you can, and to walk the docks at dusk if you cannot. So the pitch and rope can remind you that strong things are made from small fibers laid patiently together. You promise to try. She presses your fingers once and lets you go with the simple benediction that suits her. May the hour come easy. Outside, the lane meets you like a familiar shawl. You walk slow enough to keep the cup's lingering warmth. Children chalk circles on stone. A cat occupies the exact center of the sunlit patch by the stairs. Someone mends a basket on the sill and does not look up. You think of Joanna's steady hands, of Maria's attentive silences, of Beatrice and her beeswax patience. You think of the midwife's phrase, "door that opens," and how it feels like a key you will not have to search for in the dark. Back at your table, you put the sprig in the bowl beside the folded scrap. You smooth the paper and write each name once more, not larger, only clearer. Your breath lengthens as you write, and when you finish, the room seems to breathe with you. You fold the scrap and place it under the candle holder, a small anchor that does not mind being small. Above the roofs, gulls drift without deciding where to land. You do not need to decide again. You only need to walk the decision forward, one plain step at a time. You take the long way down toward the market, because the long way is better for listening. Stone steps lace the hill, polished by more feet than you can count, and your shoes make a soft argument with each riser. The morning is not loud yet. It is the kind of busy that tucks its shirt in. You breathe pitch and river, and the sharper thread of vinegar that lives near fish. Canvas awnings wake with their ropes, sighing as they take their shapes. You step into the shade as if entering a tent of patient voices, and the day accepts you without ceremony. The first stall lays order on a table the way a clerk lays order on a page. Sardines lie head to tail, all their silver pointing toward the river, as if they are still deciding where to go. A woman dusts her boards with damp sawdust so the scales behave, and salts with the pinch of someone who knows that too much is a speech and just enough is a sentence. Beside her, a boy turns a crank. Water slips from a bucket, the wood drinks, and for a blink the air smells like clean knives. News arrives before noon but after fish. It moves along the row in low tones that do not demand attention. You stand near enough to hear prices offered like favors rather than challenges. A respectful voice, a true scale, a hand that does not flourish. This is the market's arithmetic. You are watching for the same arithmetic in people. A sponsor is not a banner. A sponsor is a measure set on the beam. Weight answering weight until the arm hangs level. You try your names against this moving choir. Joanne, while a fishmonger tests a blade on his thumb and nods, satisfied without grinning at it. Maria, while a grocer counts almonds in his palm, and returns 2 to the scoop without being asked. Beatrice, while a basket maker checks a rim for splinters with the pad of her finger, and then blows once lightly to send the dust away. Each name changes nothing around you. It is a good sign. Reliable names do not ask for trumpets. They settle like coins that know their purses. A baker passes with a board of rolls, and a small flour ghost follows because it cannot bear to be left. You buy 1 roll because warm bread is a kind of counsel. You break it open and spread it with a thumb of cheese offered from a knife made for offering. The baker does not perform the goodness of his bread. He simply looks pleased with what flour and heat have done. You file him away as a lesson. Pride in the work, humility in the body. A crate of lemons sits like a pocket of sunrise. Their skins leave a trace of oil on your fingertips just for being curious. The seller slices one, and the air sharpens in a pleasant way that wakes the back of your nose. Across the row, a woman with a red kerchief sells salted fish and laughs with her whole face when someone tries to bend her price the wrong direction. The laugh does not wound. It herds the talk back toward sense. You enjoy the way she does it, and wonder what kind of madrina such a laugh would make one who refuses foolishness, without making a show of refusal. You hover at a stall of plain earthenware. The potter stacks bowls so they lean like neighbors speaking over a windowsill. He explains nothing. He does not tell you how to cook in them or what to cook. He trusts you to own your own hunger. You turn a bowl in your hands and feel the ring at its base, the place where the vessel once held on to the wheel and then let go. You consider how a sponsor must know both arts, holding on and letting go, each at its proper hour, neither with ceremony. Further along, two men dispute politely about eels and weight. One wants the dented weight because dents have stories. The other insists on the smooth one because stories have no place on the beam. They settle it by setting both and watching what the arm says. You like that. Ask the beam, not the mouth. You consider your own beam the simple bar in your chest that tips toward people who are not performing. It is steady under the canvas, steady even with the small wind that travels upriver and lifts the awnings like pale sails. A young sailor with rope marks on his palms pauses to buy a pair. He turns it once, twice, as if reading a letter, then eats it as if the letter is kind. He calls the seller Donna as though she were his aunt. You think of absence again the way the sea borrows the best men and returns them with stories instead of hours. You weigh Juan against that horizon and decide you can live with stories if the hours he keeps on land are real. You pause where tins of oil and stacks of candles smell like a patient hive. The seller wraps a small taper for you without looking busy about it. She does not make a sale feel like a ceremony. She does not have to. The candle is honest and will burn like any honest thing. Steady, a little stubborn in a draft, brighter with company. You tuck it into your basket and think about vows that burn in the same plain way. People bring you rumors to test you without meaning to test you. Someone mentions a cousin suddenly generous. Someone mentions a neighbor suddenly punctual. You nod and let both rumors walk on without you. Sudden is not your favorite word. You prefer habits grown the slow way, like rope, twist by twist. You prefer histories that do not need footnotes shouted over fish. The voices thin and thicken. The awnings billow and settle. You keep your names in your pocket like smooth stones and take them out only when you need to feel their weight. At the far end where crates meet river, you sit on a low step and watch the water keep saying the same thing in different sentences. A gull drops a shell on stone and is surprised when the shell cooperates. A cooper laughs and salutes the bird with his mallet. A priest passes with his book under his arm and a single fish scale clinging to his sleeve like a blessing that missed. He does not brush it off. You like him more for leaving it there. A man who can carry ordinary things without apology. You buy a thin strip of dried orange peel for the walk home, a bright ribbon on your tongue. You do not hurry. The market wears its own clock, and you borrow its slower minute hand. Your basket is almost nothing bread crust. The taper, the bowl you could not resist. A handful of almonds that tap together like soft beads, enough to feel the day folded and put away. You turn once to look at the row hole. Silver fish, resin ropes, fruit winking under leaves, faces that do not strain. Nothing has asked you for a performance. Everything has asked you for patience. On the climb back, you take the steps 2 at a time and then, sensibly, 1 at a time. You rehearse how you will speak to each person you have chosen. Not dramatic, not secretive. A plain request said in a plain voice in a doorway that smells like lunch. You will not bring a bargain. You will bring a loaf and a taper and the good kind of silence that invites a yes to arrive at its own pace. You will ask for the long work and promise the long gratitude. You will not write anything down where anyone can trip over it. You will write it in visits. By the time you reach your street, the sun has found its angle, and the awnings below are white sails pulling at their ropes. The murmur follows you up the hill in a softened form, as if you had tucked it into your basket by mistake. You set the basket on the table and hear the small tap of almonds against clay. You are not waiting for a sign. You have had signs all morning bread that did not ask for praise, scales that told the truth, a priest who wore a fish scale without fuss. You pour water, you cut a slice, you sit, and you let the decision rest next to you like a well-balanced weight that has no need to move. The church stands at the bend where the street remembers to be quiet. You feel the cool of the porch before you step into it. A hush shaped by stone and old wood. Swallows stitch soft seams above the square. Their shadows skim the lintel like quick blessings. You pause at the threshold the way you do in good doorways, letting your breath match the porch's slower air. Resin and beeswax keep company here, with damp lime and washed wool. You touch the jam with your fingertips. Not superstitious, only grateful for wood that has learned the habit of welcome. The priest is where he usually is at this hour, halfway in sunlight, halfway in shade, reading a small book as if it were a sleeping cat he does not want to wake. He looks up, sees you, and the lines beside his mouth warm by a degree. He does not ask what you want. He offers a place to sit. The bench is simple and smooth, the kind worn honorable by backs that have decided to rest. You sit, and the wood takes your shape without argument. You do not present a case. You share a morning. You mention a plain day chosen between two brighter ones. You mention a preference for early light, fewer footsteps, and a font that has not been crowded with intentions. He nods at each part, as if you have recited small commandments he had hoped someone might remember. He likes the early hours, he says. Words behave better before the sun overheats them. Names arrive with their edges intact. Oil warms gently and does not rush to become scent. You tell him you have 2 names in your pocket, and a third that lingers respectfully nearby. He accepts the arithmetic without rummaging. 1 sponsor is enough, he says, and 2 may stand if they do not turn the aisle into a parade. The church prefers promises it can hear without straining. He taps the book closed with 2 fingers, not as a verdict, but as a pause. Are they people who arrive before the knock and leave after the last cup is washed? He wonders, he asks it in other words, but that is what you hear. You offer portraits instead of arguments. A man who mends before he speaks. A woman whose silences are attentive rather than empty. Another whose hands shine with beeswax because she finishes what she starts. The priest receives these light coins placed on a table and nods at their honest weight. He is content with modest wealth. He does not inquire about purses. Heavy gifts, he notes mildly, can travel with long strings, and string is useful for tying up fish, but not for tying up promises. He speaks about names as if they are small boats. Keep them serviceable and easy to handle. Let them read cleanly when the clerk puts quill to paper. Let them ride out tempests without catching on unnecessary ornaments. He has seen a letter added or dropped turn a life into a series of corrections shouted through a window. He smooths a page with the back of his hand and smiles at the thought of a name that can be called from a stairway without requiring a breath and a half. A pigeon patrols the porch as if employed. It halts by your shoe and pretends it has business there. You consider gifts, the small tokens that follow vows like quiet cousins. The priest prefers the ones that do not ask for future accounting. A taper that will burn, a ribbon to mark a page, a loaf still singing from the oven, a pinch of clean salt. More is not forbidden, he says. It is simply heavier when it arrives tied to expectations nobody bothered to name. He asks about timing that does not live on a calendar. If the child comes before the hour you guessed, who will send for him? Who will hold the door while the mother is tended? Who will make a path through a lane that suddenly forgets how to be wide? You answer with the names that have been traveling with you since morning. He tests them gently, not as a judge, but as a man who has watched doors open in good and poor weather. He seems to like what he hears because he does not offer alternatives. He speaks of the font the way a cooper speaks of a barrel. Its rim cool, its bowl clean, its water replaced before anyone thinks to ask about it. He will read the words slowly. He will not look to the doorway to see who is watching. He will resist the urge to make a lesson out of a sacrament. This pleases you. You are not making a performance. You are making a promise. Your own breath lengthens at the thought of an hour that minds its work without inviting applause. A boy crosses the porch with a broom and begins at the far corner, working dust toward the square where the wind can claim it. The priest watches him with the contentment of someone who prefers brooms to trumpets. Will you feed 5 or 15 after the water? He asks. Whoever fits at the table without borrowing benches, you say. He approves. A full house is not always a fed house, and the best wine is the one that lets a nap arrive in mid-afternoon. You unfold your scrap, not for him to keep, only to steady your hands. The names sit on the page without bowing or puffing themselves up. He spells them aloud, careful, and you feel the pleasant certainty that the clerk's quill will not stumble. Tell them plainly and soon, he suggests, and offer them nothing but the honor itself with a small token so they know nothing else is hidden inside it. You have a loaf at home that will do. You have a taper that promises its own small sun. Before you go, he opens the little book again and shows you nothing in particular. A page of Psalms whose words have kept many mornings quiet. He does not point. He invites you to look and not read. The letters sit like well-behaved fishermen on a wall, each minding its place. You take their calm and put it in your pocket with the names. A bell low in the nave moves the air like a spoon in a bowl. The porch breathes once, as if agreeing. At the threshold you turn, because turning is respectful. He gives you a blessing compact enough to carry with a loaf. May the hour find you ready, and the water find you calm. You thank him, and step out into the square where the warm day is gaining ground. Stone feeds a gentle heat to your souls. The city resumes its plain hum. You walk home by a seam of shade stitched to the wall by laundry. There is nothing urgent left to plan, only errands that look like errands. A visit to a doorway, a second visit to another doorway, and afterward, the simple relief of soup. You pass a window where two voices debate extra syllables. You let them keep their syllables. Your pocket keeps only what it needs. The porch behind you returns to its usual work, welcoming anyone who remembers how to stand still for a moment. You do not look back. You have been looked after. The rules, such as they are, have settled like dust that knows exactly where to land. At the table, you spread a cloth and set out the plain tools of choosing: a stub of charcoal and a bowl of dried beans. You will not bargain with the future. You will only weigh it. The beans make a quiet sound like distant rain when a few slide from your palm. You draw a rough square and divide it with a finger, not because lines decide anything, but because they teach your thoughts to stand in place. Names to one side, ties to the other. Blood, marriage, neighbors, guild. Each tie is a twist in a rope. One twist keeps a bundle together. Too many turn into a knot. You say Juon and set a bean. He is cousin to no one, who will appear at your table and call favors by their first names. He has eaten your soup and left you silence instead of stories about cost. You roll the bean until it rests in the corner that means acceptable distance. You say Maria and set a bean that feels slightly heavier because Maria has a sister who measures kindness with a ruler. You let that be only a measure, not a verdict. A sponsor can stand beside you without bringing her counting sister to the doorway. A sponsor can keep her yes from sprouting extra leaves. You tap the bean once. It lies still. You say Beatriz and do not place the bean at once. Beatriz is a widow, and widows in your lane collect obligations the way roof tiles collect starlings. Some land, some lift off. Beatriz offers presents without ledger. Last winter she sat with a boy whose cough insisted on being heard. She matched her breathing to his until the room remembered how to be slow. You set the bean where steadiness lives. You draw no names from the family basket today, though two would gladly present themselves. Blood makes a strong rope and an untidy net. Cousins remember dinners longer than promises. Uncles remember dowries across 3 parishes. You are not suspicious. You are careful. 2 beans at the cloth's edge honor kin, without inviting them to the font. The gesture is enough to quiet the part of you that still wants everyone chosen. You look at the column called obligations and name them so they stay small. A visit when fever presses. A loaf when work hides. A hand at a desk on a cold morning. A candle up a stair when night resists. A seat kept at a baptism in another house when your turn comes to stand back. None is heavy alone. Together they are a basket best carried by those who enjoy carrying baskets. You think of promises you will make in return, because promises behave better when acknowledged. You will keep a plate and a seat for them whenever the year remembers joy. You will send a word when the sea takes its time sending a man home. You will not ask them to be saints or bankers. You will ask them to be the kind of people the house already believes they are. At the window, a thread of air lifts the cloth's corner and lets it fall again. Choices must breathe. You redraw nothing. You lift the beans into the bowl one by one, listening for the soft click that means a decision has landed without bruising. When you finish, the square looks like an open door you did not know you were drawing. You consider weights already exchanged, because old weights tilt new beams. Maria has mended a hem without mentioning it or looking at the door for thanks. Joan has left rope in your bucket on a day when rope would have been a cost. Beatriz has brought a candle stub that burned longer than its height. These are the small coins of the hill. They travel without announcements, and their metal is honest. A knock travels up the stair and fades. not your door. Charcoal dust graze your fingertips. You wash them and watch water carry away lines you no longer need to see, because they have turned into something you can feel. You dry your hands and press your palms to the table to learn its coolness. You test one more measure not written on the cloth, the gift that becomes a leash. You say it aloud and soften it until it fits a doorway. No anklets on promises. No long ropes tied to wine cups. If someone insists on a heavy basket of almonds that must be shown to the square, the basket can find another table. Keep the sweets that do not teach the mouth to expect parades. You practice the words you will carry across thresholds later. They are short and arrive without adjectives. Will you stand with us? Will you come early and leave late? Will you hold this child in your prayers and in your ordinary hands? You try each sentence until it keeps only its truth. Then you fold the cloth, not to hide anything, only to mark the moment when thinking consents to become doing. As you rise, the bowl of beans looks like a little font, and you smile at the trick of it. Water, beans, ink, rope, everything in the house has been teaching the same lesson. Small things, rightly used, keep larger things from forgetting their shape. You take 2 beans in your pocket for the walk as a private sign that needs no witness. They click once and keep their peace. On the stairs, the day waits like a friendly animal, watchful, not demanding. The lane offers its usual curriculum buckets, voices, a strip of river, a gull rehearsing indifference. You think of tomorrow's blessing and check again that it will not become tomorrow's burden. It will not. You have chosen people who do not own scales with invisible pans. The circle is small and strong, with room at its edge for kindness that has not been invented yet. The guild hall sits a street back from the river wind, timber breathing under whitewash. Its door wide enough for benches to pass and narrow enough to keep conversation inside. You come when morning has found its rhythm, but not its noise. The porch smells of oak shavings and linseed rubbed into patient grain. Inside, a sift of sawdust softens the floor so footsteps arrive as whispers. A banner hangs from the beam with a painted patron, work tired in an honest way. You are here to see whether a maestra's steadiness could fit around your child like a well-cut frame. A clerk at a table copies names with patient shoulders. His quill walks the page like a careful beetle. To your left, a plane sings along a board and leaves a curling ribbon that springs like fruit peel. To your right, a mallet persuades a joint into agreement. Nobody performs industry. Work behaves as it should, present without announcing itself. You watch the master at the long bench. He measures without speaking twice, not for drama, but because wood enjoys changing its mind. The apprentice stands half a pace behind, ready with wedges and the posture of someone learning to wait. The master corrects a line with the smallest tap, the kind that would never reach the square but matters to a door. When he greets a visitor, he sets down the tool first. A small thing, but small things decide whether a house breathes easily. On one wall sits a chest with 3 locks, the guild's careful heart. Keys live on 3 belts, a hedge against foolishness. The clerk moves a ledger aside to pour water. The pitcher talks to the cup, stone to clay. You drink and let coolness tell your chest to stop arranging the future with tight hands. You have not come to buy a name that opens doorways by weight alone. You have come to test whether a maker of doors is the kind of door your child can walk through and back again. A woman brings bread to a windowsill and leaves it under cloth, a practical kindness that will turn into lunch on its own. The men thank the bread without stopping, which is its own reverence. You think about gifts again, the ones that make a table warmer rather than taller. In a voice sized for indoors, you ask whether the master leaves the city for long jobs. The clerk smiles into the page and says the master is faithful to roofs that do not float. Shipwrights own the wind. Carpenters own the doorways. It lands like reassurance. A padrino who keeps to streets you can find is a comfort when winter pretends to be braver than it is. The master notices you without hurry and wipes his hands as if greeting were also a tool. You mention nothing more than a neighborly visit, which is true. You watch how he holds a pause. He does not fill it with inventory or praise. He asks whether your house keeps morning light or afternoon light, which tells you he is a person who understands where life happens. You answer, and he nods as if you have said something useful about a hinge. You let the talk stroll around work. Apprenticeships begin in patience and end in patience, he says. A boy learns to fetch the right tool because a man once learned to fetch the right word. You imagine a future where a padrino walks a child to a bench and stands in the doorway long enough for courage to find a chair. The picture fits without needing to be hammered. On a side table lies the guild's painted board for feast days and dues, lettered by someone who dislikes surprises. The patron's day carries a small star. Beside it, a candle box slides open and closed with the easy click that comes from long practice. In this room, even lids keep promises. An apprentice misjudges a cut and swallows a word before it forms. The master does not scold. He swaps tools and draws a truer line with one slow stroke. The room exhales. You think of how correction can be offered without an audience. A sponsor who knows how to fix a line without turning the boy into a lesson that is a useful craft. You ask nothing direct yet. Instead, you look at the doorway and test whether a pair of shoes would stand there if you asked for a visit at dusk. The answer lives in how the master stacks shavings like pale ribbons instead of letting them drift, in how the clerk dots an I and checks that the dot became a dot, in how the apprentice returns the plane to its exact place rather than the nearest flat surface. Your measure keeps returning the same number. Reliable. A young man arrives to pay a small due, comes up short by a coin, and looks ready to drag apology into paragraphs. The clerk lifts a palm, reaches into a dish, and produces the missing piece with the air of someone who prefers not to hold up a room for want of a single circle of metal. The ledger records the debt in a hand that says, "We remember only so we can forget at the right time." You borrow that line for yourself. In your pocket, the beans you carry for company click once, as if agreeing. When you finally speak the thing you came to test, you do it as if asking for a cup of water. If only if it suits your house. Would a master such as yourself consider standing at a font for a child whose home is not far from this very bench? The master's gaze remains level. His answer is not a speech. He says he would come early, stand where he is told, and return after to make sure the stair door does not stick. He lists it like tools in a kit. Arrive, stand, return, check. Nothing borrowed, nothing loud. You do not accept or decline in the doorway of the question. You let the answer take its place beside your other measures. The bread on the sill has cooled. Someone pours a little wine into a cup and does not call it a toast. The room keeps working, unbothered by your small test, which is exactly what you hoped. On your way out, you run your palm along the beam that holds the banner. The wood is smooth where hands agree about height. The patron on the cloth looks less tired now, or perhaps you do. Outside, the river wind finds you and tucks a curl of shavings into your basket as a souvenir. You let it ride there. It smells like a quiet yes that is not in a hurry to be spoken. You take the curve of street that favors shade. You do not rush to the next door. You have learned what you came to learn. Some promises can be made by people whose hands already know the weight of making. At your corner, you look back only to count the windows open just enough to let the day in without swagger, and then you carry on, slow and satisfied, with the shavings breathing a faint resin note beside the bread you will take home. The neighbor's courtyard hides a little behind a bend in the lane, as if kindness prefers not to stand on the main road. You go there when the sun is past scolding and not yet heavy. A good hour for testing what people do when no one is keeping score. The gate complains softly and then remembers its manners. Inside, tiles keep the ground cool, and a laundry line writes a pale sentence from fig tree to wall. The air smells of damp clay, old soap, and time bruised by feet that do not hurry. Maria is at the basin with her sleeves learning the meaning of water. She is not performing washing. She is simply washing. A pot keeps a slow breath near the doorway, the sort of stew that does its own thinking if left alone. A stool sits in the patch of shade that migrates across the stones, and a basket dozes with 2 loaves under cloth. You say nothing about choices. You say you came with a borrowed measure to return. She takes the measure without inspecting it for dents, sets it where it belongs, and returns to the basin as if the visit has been folded neatly into the morning. A boy drifts past the gate with a scuffed knee and the look of someone pretending not to be hungry. The pretending is worse than the hunger. It works badly. Maria's eye finds him the way a bird finds a crumb, without ceremony, without missing. She greets him with rapaz, no name needed, and asks whether the road tastes better with bread. He shrugs in the dialect of boys who hope the answer is yes, but were taught not to say so. She lifts a loaf, cuts the heel that keeps the rest safe, pours a finger of oil into a chipped saucer, and shakes 3 grains of salt between 2 fingers. You stand where you are and learn. She turns the saucer so the oil pools nearest his small reach. She keeps speaking as if talking to weather. 2 sentences about a boat she once saw painted a hopeful green. 1 sentence about figs taking their time to sweeten. The boy's shoulders decide to be shoulders again instead of shields. He eats the heel in measured bites that pretend not to be hurried. The oil shines his lip like a mild blessing. The salt wakes his face. When he finishes, she wipes his mouth with the edge of the cloth she already holds, and tucks a small apple into his palm, as if apples grow from courtyards that mind their work. This is the shape of generosity you came to measure. Not the trumpet, just the door that opens without asking for names. Bread appears, and the step appears with it. Oil arrives as if it grew in the yard. No hand waits midair for the coin of gratitude. You file away the picture the way clerks file papers. Clear label, easy to find later. You let your pocket keep still. You do not touch the 2 beans you carry as a private tally. The courtyard has already done the counting for you. Chores continue because goodness does not require a stage. Maria lifts a pail and decides it is too proud. She splits the water between 2 pails and lets them be modest together. She asks if your jar needs filling, and when you say not today, she fills it anyway because tomorrow has a habit of arriving early. A lizard reads the warm wall. Like a slow book, a fly discovers the limits of a window and learns resignation. The pulley mutters as she raises a bucket from the cistern, rope against wood, a sound like a patient throat clearing. An old man wanders in, remembering his sleeve only when the breeze tells on it. He shows the tear and laughs at himself so you will not have to. Maria threads a needle and sets 2 small stitches while the stew exhales under its lid. She ties the thread off with the assurance of someone who has signed many quiet contracts with cloth. The man leaves with his sleeve improved, and the courtyard no more heroic than before. You think of correction again, the kind offered without audience, the kind that leaves a person taller instead of smaller. You talk about nothing, which is the best way to talk when choosing is nearby. She asks if the priest still reads slowly. You say he does, and she looks content on behalf of words that like to be heard. She asks if the market lemons are honest this week, and nods at your answer with the gravity lemons deserve. You mention a morning you have marked. She does not ask whether she sits inside that day. She asks whether you want the earlier hour, when stone is cooler under sandals and names keep their edges. You borrow a pinch of salt, because borrowing something lets a house show you its manner. She pours more than a pinch and adds a sprig of green because salt travels better with company. You offer a coin you would offer to anyone. She accepts the thanks instead and tells you to bring the bowl back with water inside it, so the return is also a help. You like the way this turns a small exchange into 2 kindnesses going in opposite directions. A woman from 2 doors down comes in with news that wants to be gossip but arrives as laundry. Maria catches it gently and wrings it without splashing. Who needs checking on, she asks, not who needs telling. Which bucket is cracked, not which tongue. The news becomes errands. A visit here, a loaf there, a word at the window of a man who has been too proud this week to be seen at the fountain. You admire the way she trims stories down until they are light enough to carry. The shade moves, as shade does, and the stool follows at its accustomed pace. Maria lifts the cloth on the second loaf to check its feeling about the oven. She does not ask you to admire it. She asks whether you can leave yours here while you run an errand, so the heat can take its time without you. You leave it gladly. A child begins to cry somewhere out of sight, and she hums 3 notes that convince the air to soften. The child believes the air and improves. You find yourself believing the air as well. You do not ask the question yet. Asking too soon would turn the kindness into a stage, and kindness dislikes stages unless they need sweeping. Instead, you help carry the water to the outer step and scatter a little to tame the dust. You watch the way her doorway collects people and lets them go unclaimed. You wonder whether a vow spoken in that doorway would feel like it had found its right address. Your wondering does not feel like a test anymore. It feels like recognition. When you rise to go, she gives you a small heel proof that sharing does not empty a basket, and the sprig she had measured for your bowl, as if it had grown with your errand in mind. You tuck both with a care that has nothing to do with value, and everything to do with what value feels like. You promise to return the little bowl with water inside. She nods, as if you have agreed to carry weather from one patch of shade to another. The gate remembers how to complain, and then how to behave. The lane blinks in the light, and pretends not to have noticed anything at all. You walk home with the picture of the boy, on the step arranged in your head like a painted tile, blue on white. The tile needs no caption. It is what you wanted to see. Generosity that does not practice in a mirror. Your feet find their own evenness. Your breath keeps company with the day. The choice you carried into the courtyard leaves with you but lighter, as if it had been given a handle. The house will recognize it when you bring it to the table. The house will say yes, without knowing it said anything. You walk toward the docks because absence argues loudest beside water. The wind lifts the day by the corners and shakes tar, hemp, and vinegar into the air. Carts complain over the cobbles. A bell aboard a boat rings as if clearing its throat. You stand where the quay begins to think about becoming the river, and watch ropes behave like patient snakes. Men coil them with the practiced grace of people who keep leaving and then keep returning. The river says what it always says. I carry, I return, I do not explain. Joan belongs to this grammar. His hands speak pilot lines and reef knots even when they hold a loaf. He greets you without spectacle, the way a man greets the lane that will still be there tomorrow. You picture him at the font, steady, quiet, smelling faintly of pitch, and then picture the other thing. Weeks when his shadow belongs to gulls. A padrino can be two things at once, present like an oar, absent like a mast at sea. The question is not whether he leaves, it is whether his leaving keeps a rhythm the house can bear. A sail unrolls like a letter read aloud. The words are in the wind's handwriting, half of them slant. A woman with salt-stiff apron ties looks up from a net she is mending and nods with the diplomacy of someone who has bargained with weather. She does not ask why you have come. The river answers for you. When you ask how the year stands, she answers in winds, not months. Northerlies behaved, southerlies sulked. Storms remembered their manners until they didn't. Patience is a currency here. Everyone budgets it. You inventory the absences that matter and the ones that don't. A padrino who sails can miss a table, a candle, a morning when names are said slow and careful. A padrino who sails can also come home with a habit of waking early, of mending quietly, of knowing which door creaks and how to keep it from announcing grief. Presence is not always a chair at supper. Sometimes it is a hand that finds work before a sentence finishes. You look for that hand in Joanno's way of standing still alert, not fidgeting, as if listening for the job that is not spoken yet. Boats talk to shore, with ropes and gestures. You watch a short dance, cast off, hold, slack, take. You think about what dance a home needs. There are nights when a fever climbs a stair, mornings when shoes must be argued into, noon hours when bread and patience run short at the very same time. A padrino's promise must stretch across those ordinary weathers. Can Joan O's rope reach that far when the wind insists it belongs to him? You imagine him sending word from a port 2 days distant, a neat line in someone else's hand, the right name, the right blessings, the wrong hour. You borrow a crate as a bench and let the river be the clock. Children try to throw pebbles into tomorrow and settle for today. A dog debates the theology of waves and decides to bark the problem into submission. You taste salt you did not earn. You test the idea of two sponsors again, not because abundance is fashionable, but because multiplication sometimes makes steadiness. If Juan stands on the day and is carried away by wind after, could Maria's doorway keep the promise warm? Could Beatrice's patience hold the quiet hours that follow? A pilot boat noses out and writes a quick sentence on the water, then turns the period into foam. You think of letters to be written and names to be spelled correctly in absence and then again in presence. The clerk will mark the page whether Juan stands on the quay or rides among the whitecaps. The book does not feel loneliness, but people do. So you ask yourself the plainest version of the question. When the door is knocked at dusk, whose steps do you want to hear on your stair? The mending woman snips her thread with her teeth as if cutting weather to size. Her men is due on Thursday by the kind of mathwives use. Wind plus rumor minus bravado. She shrugs a grace you wish you could borrow whole and hands you a piece of it anyway. Choose the man who can be found by other routes when the river borrows him, she says, in other words. Choose the door that does not lock when it is disappointed. You hold the counsel like a warm bowl, fingers careful, thankful for heat you did not make. Juan comes off a gangplank with a coil over his shoulder and drops it into a circle that lies obedient on the stone. He checks the knot for no one's benefit. He is a man who does not mind if the work is seen. He minds if the work is wrong. You remember the midwife's phrase door that opens, and consider how sailors learn doors differently. Hatches, gates, a sky that sometimes behaves like a lid and sometimes like a window. Storms do not send messages saying running late. They arrive and men adjust. Houses must learn their own version of that art. You do not answer today. You let the question sit beside the river and watch whether it grows or shrinks in the salt. A gull balances on a post with the comic seriousness of a magistrate. A fisherman wipes his hands on his trousers and leaves two dark prints displayed like stamps. A priest crosses the quay and nods at everyone with an equality you admire. The river keeps to its liturgy. Arrive, depart, repeat. You pocket the rhythm as if it were a bead and rise without theatrics. On the walk home you inventory chairs. How many do you truly need at the table of promise? Enough for a sailor who leaves in patterns the house can predict, and enough for someone who will be there when soup tastes thin. You decide you can live with absence if it arrives with tools and leaves with errands done. If it writes letters without adjectives. If it remembers the child's name without leaning on saints to carry the load. At your door you touch the lintel, feel grain worn to velvet, and hear in the wood the argument for steadiness. Inside, the room smells of bread that behaved itself, and of the shavings the wind tucked into your basket earlier. You set the basket down and lay the two beans from your pocket on the table. They settle side by side like small boats at a calm quay. You do not label them. You do not need to. The house knows which is which. The decision will come when it is due, the way tides do, not on your word but reliably, and with a sound you will recognize. The candle shop waits in a narrow slip of street where the sun threads itself thin between roofs. You enter as if stepping into a hive that has decided to practice being a room. Warmth greets you first, then a breath of clean sweetness that belongs to bees in careful hands. Rows of tapers hang like pale sheaves, their skins faintly glossy, their wicks prim and well-behaved. A bell the size of a walnut clicks once and then chooses silence, which suits the place. The candlemaker stands from a bench where thread-thin wicks lie coiled like quiet snakes. He wipes his palms on a cloth that wears the day's yellow the way aprons wear flour. He does not say, "Can I help you?" He says, "Good morning," and let your eyes do the shopping. Beeswax. He nods toward the gold. Tallow. He tips his chin toward the plain. You thank him and move slowly down the hanging rows, touching nothing and learning everything with your nose and your patience. You are here to think about promises without turning them into groceries. A taper is not a bargaining chip. It is a portable hour of steadiness. You weigh thickness and length against the kind of light you prefer. A flame that hums, not boasts. A wick that holds a conversation with air without trying to win it. You lift one taper and feel its balance, no hidden vanity, no poor posture. Another flares too eagerly. You set it back where it can rehearse out of sight. On the wall sit molds and clay jars with lids that grin and don't. A shallow pan of cooled wax holds yesterday's dips, each layer a memory of a patient hand. The maker turns a stick in a pot, lifts, and lets the thin rain of gold return to itself. You watch because craft knows secrets that advice never learned. He measures with his thumb because his thumb has been promoted over the years to an instrument. You ask for 2 tapers that can behave in doorways without showing off, and for 1 shorter candle with a steady base, in case wind decides to visit. He nods. The sound of the shop is liquid when it works and papery when it wraps. He parcels yours in paper that remembers bread and ties it with string that does not try to look like ribbon. The whole bundle is the shape of modesty. You are pleased by how unremarkable it looks. Gifts that announce themselves often come with speeches you did not order. On a shelf lives a small tray of salt packets made for journeys. He keeps them because the road is often longer than people guess. You turn one over and imagine it tucked into cloth, simple as a nod. You ask for 4. You will use 2 and keep 2 against days when soup and resolve both need waking. He names a price with the dignity of exactness, not a friend's favor, not a stranger's tax. You pay with coins that have learned how to leave your hand without needing praise. A boy from the church slips in with a bundle of stubs that need new lives. The maker weighs them, frowns kindly at the ones too drowned in wick to be useful, and promises to pour them into a small altar light that will burn where no one notices it and everyone relies on it. You like that economy. Yesterday's flames teaching today's prayers how to behave. You think of sponsors again, how old kindness gets melted down into light for new rooms. You ask about smoke, because rooms have opinions. He says smoke comes from haste and pride, from wicks left long and drafts left invited. He shows you a pinch of powder he uses to dress a wick that wants to behave. You take his counsel the way you take salt, enough to matter, not enough to be clever about. Trim before you light, he says. Rest the flame after you carry it. He is speaking about candles, but your house hears the wider lesson. You consider adding a gift that looks like a gift, and then stop yourself. The promises you are making need companions, not costumes. A taper, a ribbon for a book, a scoop of salt. Enough to say we are beginning. Not enough to say look at us beginning. You put a coin in the saucer that earlier pretended to be a scale, and the saucer pretends not to notice. Good, you think. Even crockery understands plainness here. When you leave, the street seems brighter for a moment, as if your eyes had been taught again how to measure day. You walk with the parcel tucked like a small loaf against your side. Each step answers the little weight with agreement. You rehearse how you will present it. Bread wraps bread, light wraps light. Salt stays folded until someone asks. You will not stack them on a table like trophies. You will lay them down like tools and let the words follow. By the time you reach your corner, the hive-sweet smell has become faint company. You store the candles where heat will not teach them bad habits. Slide the salts into the bowl with the beans and feel the house approve. The day stretches, unbothered. You boil water for tea with no ceremony and drink it near the window while a small fly practices the art of not getting what it wants. You are not waiting anymore. You are keeping company with readiness, which is a nicer companion than anxiety and much cheaper to feed. Soon you will knock on 2 doors and speak the shortest sentences you own. For now, you let the quiet finish its thought. In the next room, light slips along the floor like a helpful cat. You watch it move, and it watches nothing. And between you, the hour becomes the right size. You climb the narrow stair that knows everyone's tread and come to a door that keeps its manners. The latch lifts without fuss. Inside, the widow's room teaches other rooms how to behave. Swept one more time than needed, aired even in winter. A low chest rests under the window. A small table keeps 2 chairs honest. A shelf holds jars labeled in a hand that looks like patience learned to write. Beeswax has taught the wood a quiet shine that seems to soften footsteps. Beatriz greets you with the nod she uses for everyone, neighbors and priests. She sets aside the hem she was mending and smooths the cloth as if to reassure it. You sit where the chair seems to want you. She pours water into 2 cups and lets yours arrive first. In this room, the order of small things is a language. Guest before host, quiet before questions, usefulness before eloquence. Her tools are tidy the way tools like to be when allowed. A needle pillow keeps its pins like a small field of stars. Thread waits in skeins that do not quarrel. A clay jar of buttons sits sorted by color and mood. You notice a ledger, thin, not secret, open to a page that names the week's bread, oil, and wool in strokes firm enough to read on dim days. She does not hide it because it is not a performance. It is how she keeps tomorrow from surprising the pan. On the ledge, a small pot of thyme insists on staying green. The leaf you pinch leaves a clean scent on your fingertips. She admits to murmuring to it when no one is near. A practice you will not repeat outside this room, but will remember when soup tastes tired. A rosary hangs on the chair back in soft curves. The floor keeps its old pattern of tile. Your foot warms one square, and then the next. You tell her you've been walking through your choices as if they were streets. visiting each at the hour when they are most themselves. She understands without requesting a map. She asks whether the priest still reads slowly. You say he does. She nods, approving of syllables that reach the ear intact. She asks whether you hope for many voices at the table or prefer fullness that fits inside a single loaf. You answer honestly. Enough company to make the room hum, enough quiet to let a nap arrive. You speak of timing not printed on calendars, knocks at dusk, coins that need finding, a fever that asks for watching, shoes that resist a child. She listens, like a rope listens, taking the pull, giving a little, holding. When you ask for a story, she gives 3 small ones. A night counting cloths without waking a mother. A morning, when a boy's cough learned to follow steadier breathing. An afternoon, when a lost errand found its owner because she waited in the right doorway without making noise. She tells them without decoration and does not linger on the endings. The point is the work, not the telling. On a shelf sits a tray with errands written on scraps. Bring broth to the cooper. Borrow a book of hours for Donna Inez, who reads slowly but refuses to stop. Mend the sleeve of the priest who will not sit long enough to be mended. She moves 2 scraps from left to right while you are there, not to impress you, but because the day has agreed to receive them. You think of promises again, and admire how she stacks them. No towers, just little piles that refuse to fall. You slide a small taper and a length of ribbon onto the table without clearing your throat. Gifts here know how to share a surface. She accepts them with a nod that feels like a habit rather than an emotion. She opens a drawer and places them among other tidy survivals. Bits of cloth that will become dignities. Corks that will keep sorrow from evaporating too quickly. A spare key that opens nothing but memory. Nothing rattles when the drawer closes. You do not dress the question in lace. You ask it in the voice you use for lending salt. If it would suit her house, and if the hour does not find her otherwise obliged, would she stand at the font beside you and hold this child in ordinary keeping? The room takes a breath, and so do you. Beatrice looks at the cloth she had smoothed, as if checking whether it has decided to wrinkle again. She says she can come early, with water on the stove in case it is needed, and leave late, after the last cup is washed. Everything in you settles. Your mouth remembers how to say thank you in a way that fits the room. You ask which hour's light she prefers, because rooms are choosy. She says the first, when birds have decided to be sensible, and neighbors are still considering their faces. You both taste that hour like a sip of cool water. Before you leave, she sets a saucer under the candle on the table and trims the wick for the pleasure of doing a thing properly in front of someone who cares. The small flame visits, approves, and moves on. She wraps a heel of bread in a square of cloth for your pocket, as if you might forget how to get home without ballast. You promise to return the cloth, and she pretends not to hear, which is her way of agreeing. Out in the lane, the wind minds its own apron. You carry the heel like a modest talisman, and feel the house in your pocket, the shelf with jars that do not gossip, the ledger that refuses drama, the chair that holds its guests before they have earned it. You have not acquired a spectacle. You have confirmed a habit. The day goes on as if nothing has happened, which is how you know something has. Evening leans over the house with the smell of salted fish giving back its sea. You soak the cod long enough for regret to leave it, then coax it into the pot with onions softened to sweetness and a thread of oil that gleams like patience. A clay dish of olives waits with the dignity of things that keep well. Bread sits under a cloth, as if practicing humility. The table is set for family, enough chairs to make the room hum, not enough to turn the air into a fairground. They arrive as relatives do, in 2s and 3s, bringing weather on their shoulders and advice in their pockets. A cousin kisses the air near your cheek and claims the place where he can see the pot best. An aunt examines the plates as if they were letters from a distant friend. Someone asks if you salted the water like sense requires. Someone else asks if you plan to waste good oil on a day that is not a feast. You answer everyone without answering anyone. The ladle finds the bowls. Steam writes brief messages on the air and lets them vanish. You keep the meal simple so the evening will be simple. A little parsley, a squeeze of lemon that wakes the tongue without lecturing it, a handful of chickpeas that do their steady work. The first bites quiet the room, as first bites should. Then the talk begins to flex its fingers. Who will stand at the font? Asks an uncle, as if asking about the weather. Before you reply, an aunt suggests a name as bright as polished brass, a woman who keeps a chest for dowry bits and never lets a ribbon lose its pride. Your spoon keeps its pace. Brass is a metal you admire on doors, not in promises. Another cousin floats a sailor with handsome stories and a swagger the size of a sail. He can lift a barrel by himself, she adds, as if lifting barrels were a sacrament. You remember the river wind tugging at men's hours, and let the suggestion drift. The meal keeps you grounded. The fish is tender now. The olive pits clink modestly in the bowl meant for them. You slice the bread with the care you reserve for statements you do not plan to repeat. Your mother's sister folds her hands in the particular way that introduces a favor, disguised as wisdom. She speaks of keeping choices in the family, a phrase that wears nice shoes. Blood binds, she says, and you nod because blood also binds wounds, and that is a good thing. But ropes can tangle if there are too many hands on them. You smile toward your bowl and keep your list where it lives inside the calm you carried home from the priest's porch. A nephew, clever and unpracticed, suggests a sponsor with a purse heavy enough to tilt the table. He imagines shoes that never need mending and ribbons that volunteer to adorn themselves. You give him the small kindness of attention and then the equal kindness of a different subject. The weather on the hill, the small victory of bread that rose on a day the oven sulked, the priest who still reads slowly. Luxury sighs and returns to its corner without sulking. Someone remembers a story about a christening where the godfather arrived with 3 musicians and left with half the almonds' compliments of himself. The table laughs in the manner of people who would like the world to be a stage if the stage would agree to sweep itself. You pour a little more oil into the dish, not as a flourish, but because the bread prefers it. You keep your voice unadorned. We prefer a quiet morning, you say, as if remarking on dew. The sentence lands without noise and does its work anyway. The talk circles back as talk does. A cousin proposes an arrangement that sounds like a bargain hiding in a blessing. This man will stand if later you will remember his daughter when shoes are counted. You spread a small circle of oil on your bread and let the sentence pass you by like a procession seen from an upper window, pretty, distant, irrelevant to the room where soup steams. You remember the midwife's phrase about the anchor disguised as a gift, and your hands stay gentle. Your father's brother mentions a widow who has kept a door open for others longer than anyone remembers. His eyes find you because he knows what you value. You do not move faster or slower. You ask whether anyone wants more olives. You refill cups. The room changes temperature by a degree toward your weather. Your list, inside you, lays one name on the table without showing itself. The quiet feels like a good sign. Salt settles into the fish. The lemon bowls are a little empty in the way that pleases cooks. Talk softens into the kinds of errands that make houses run. Whose roof wants attention before the rains? Whether the ferryman is coughing less. Which cousin's child pronounces letters like coins and which like rain. When the circle of advice returns for a third try, it has lost its banners. Will you tell us when you've told them? Someone asks, and you say yes. The yes is not a door to more discussion. It is a blanket folded and set aside. After the bowls are empty, the table discovers almonds. Their quiet crack convinces everyone to talk more softly, the way shells teach hands to be careful. You pass the small wine. Glasses kiss the table with the humility of people who know what wine can do and choose what it should do tonight. Warm the back of the throat. Make the corners of the mouth easier to lift. Invite a nap later. A candle sputters once, remembers its manners, resumes its steady breath. When the meal is finished, the room does not become a council chamber. It becomes itself. Dishes carried, crumbs brushed into a hand, a small spill lifted with the corner of a cloth and not discussed. You stack bowls in the order that makes washing feel like a story with a beginning and an end. A niece asks if she can help, and then helps without turning the help into a song. The sink speaks its familiar language. The cups agree to be clean. At the door, good nights trickle out like a stream returning to its bed after rain. Advice tries one last time in the shape of blessings. May the sponsors be strong. May the day be early. May the water be cool. You accept every wish as if it were a folded napkin returned rightly to its place. The stair remembers each tread and tells the lane the evening behaved. When the house is quiet again, you sit with your list, which you do not unfold. It does not need unfolding. It has become part of the table, the way oil becomes part of wood. After years of being set down gently, you touch the back of the chair, where your aunt had rested her hand, and feel only wood, not direction. You blow out the candle, trim its wick while it is warm, and set it ready for tomorrow's light. Your breath is even. Your hands smell of lemon and linen. The night puts itself away without drama, and so does the choice. Night gathers like a familiar shawl, thin and clean with smoke. You light the oil lamp and wait for the quiet ascent when the wick takes flame. The glass clears and holds. A small circle of honey light settles on the table. You smooth the paper. The charcoal sits ready. You write the date to make the hour behave. Then a plain heading, names and what they bring. No columns become speeches. Leave air so thoughts can walk. First, the names that did not ask to be chosen. Joan Maria, Beatriz. You set a modest dot beside each, a clerk's approval without flourish. Beside Joan you note Sia, hope, patience, and absence, lightly. Beside Maria you write door, water, bread, and listening silence. Beside Beatriz, beeswax, ledger, dawn that keeps its shape. Not verdicts, only buttons sorted in a shallow tray. You trim the wick, less smoke, more light. Your sentences obey. Add the measures that matter when rooms are tired. Who hears a knock the first time? Who can walk a child to a desk and wait in the doorway without turning into an announcement? Who can sit through a fever and lend the room their breathing? You do not write generous. You write dependable, and let generous hide inside it like a coin in a hem. Evening keeps restraint outside, a hinge remembering itself, a cart respectful of sleep. You think of letters and the way they behave in the parish book. The clerk's quill taking Joano's tilde, honoring Maria's open mouth, minding the Z in Beatriz as if it carried a folded note. Names deserve to land correctly the first time. You flip the sheet and attempt an arithmetic with feet. Distance that can be walked. Doors that know your hand. Houses that remember morning light. Voices that fit a room without leaning. One line about timing. Choose a morning claimed by brooms and bread, not by drums and banners. A breeze tests the window and declines to visit. You weigh the paper's corners with a bowl of beans and 2 small packets of salt. One bean goes by the name that rises first when a lullaby is needed. A second by the name that arrives earliest in your picture of the font. You warm the third in your palm and set it where patient hours gather. This is not a puzzle. Puzzles want applause. You are setting a drawer so hands in the dark know where to find what they need. Nothing is rewritten. Yet the page improves the way a room improves. When a chair moves a hand's width and air remembers how to pass. A moth discovers the window and revises its plan without drama. You borrow the lesson. You revisit the day for proofs, quickly and enough. A curl of resin-scented shavings and verbs over adjectives from the guild. A heel dipped in oil and a boy's shoulders settling from Maria's courtyard. Jars labeled by a steady hand and a drawer that closed without rattling from Beatrice's room. The keys grammar carry, return, do not explain, and its counsel to choose someone who can be found by other routes when wind borrows him. Back at the table, the lamp has become part of your hand. You draw a line that is not a fence but a path. On one side, today. On the other, later. Under today, an errand to be done twice knock with a loaf and a taper. Knock again with the same. Under later, chores that follow without orders. Letters spelled cleanly. Shoes persuaded rather than forced. A seat kept that never asks who earned it. A dusk visit made without discussing it afterward. You consider abundance and step back. One sponsor can be enough. 2 can be good if they do not turn the aisle into a parade. The priest's counsel returns early light, few footsteps. A font not crowded with intentions, and you write nothing about almonds, nothing about music. Gifts will come as they please. Bread that sings, ribbon for a page, a pinch of clean salt. None will bring a leash. The flame hums low and teaches breathing to match. You taste the night like soup, mineral from cooling stone, faint sweetness from the wick, a pinch of river salt. The paper smells of your hand because charcoal remembers who asked it to speak. You underline the date with a neat knot you will not need to check. You hood the flame and hear the polite tick of metal learning darkness. The last light pauses, then leaves. In the window, Your face looks like a person who can carry a thin cup without spilling exactly the compliment a knight knows how to give. You slide the page under the plate where morning bread will rest. So when you lift one, you lift the other. You think of the porch, the font's rim, the small breath that follows water and makes the room hold still. In bed, linen remembers its assignment and quiets. The city changes keys without insisting that you listen. Your breathing takes the lower one. The lamp cools with a single click like a bow. The house approves of what has been written and can wait calmly for what will be said. You step into the small hall where a confraternity meets men and women in plain cloaks. A wooden box for alms. A bench that has learned how to hold secrets without creaking. Candles make a steady comb of light along the wall. No speeches today. Only the tidy business of mutual help. Whose roof leaks, whose child needs shoes, whose widow needs a visit that brings bread first and talk later. A clerk reads names softly. The kind of reading that never forgets it is about people and not paper. You stand at the back and let the room tell you what belonging looks like. The alms box opens. 3 keys turn, each in a different hand. A loaf is promised and arrives before the promise cools. Someone volunteers to sit with a man whose cough now owns his nights. Someone else promises a walk with a boy who is learning letters that prefer to hide. None of this is grand. It is only a way to keep houses from slipping off their foundations. You think of your child's future and whether a sponsor's name should already belong to a circle like this. Not for influence, there is very little of that here, but for practice in showing up without applause. The master from the guild is quietly present, sawdust still clinging to one cuff. Maria stands near a window and does not fidget. Beatrice has a folded list and moves 2 errands from soon to now without ceremony. Your measure nods. These are people who can carry promises without making them heavy. After prayers short, respectful, unhurried, the box closes again. The 3 keys go home to 3 belts. Outside, daylight feels brighter for having been stored a while in shared intentions. You take 1 coin from your purse and slide it toward a boy to carry forward, because learning the weight of a coin is also learning its uses. He places it in the box as if setting a chick back into its nest. The moment is small and perfect. You leave with no new names and no new doubts. The hall smelled of wax and clean wood. The air felt organized. You like the way their help travels without banners and returns without reports. A child sleeps better in a city where errands walk themselves to the right door. Your steps find the street, and the street accepts them. Spread evenly like butter that knows how to behave on bread. At the window you unroll the parish sheet. The priest copied for you feast days, and market fairs stitched into the month like beads. You do not collect beads. You look for the plain thread between them. A quiet Monday lives between 2 bright saints. You tap it with a fingernail and listen for how the hour might sound. Brooms finishing, ovens calming, the font cool and undistracted. You picture the aisle with only necessary feet yours, the priest's, the sponsor's, the child's. Early is best. Stone still keeps night's kindness. Names behave before noon makes them slouch. You choose a time that favors bread rising on its own, and neighbors still deciding whether to be busy. The priest's voice fits that hour. It never rushes a consonant off the edge. You try out how the morning will begin. Water on to warm, cloths folded inside the reach of a sleepy hand, a taper trimmed and ready to travel. You walk the route in your head, past the fig tree that has opinions about seasons, along the wall that remembers 1,000 elbows, over the 3 stones that prefer a careful step. The door latch at the church will lift as obediently as it does on Wednesdays. A ribbon waits folded inside a book to mark the name you will hear. You test the length long enough to keep its place, short enough to avoid correcting the page. You set aside a pinch of salt simply because you like the idea of a tongue waking to its first lesson, that the world has flavor and promises do too. None of this is necessary. All of it is comforting. You lay the plan on the table like bread before baking. The morning will not be a procession. It will be a sentence, clear and grammatical. We ask, we promise, we bless, we go home to soup. You write the hour on a scrap and tuck it into the bowl with the beans. A small bell somewhere says the city approves. The ferryman's boat rocks against the quay like a patient cradle. You pay with exact coins and step aboard with the stance people learn from baskets and infants. The Tagus wears its pewter mood today. The oars take slow bites. The city slides behind you into a picture, and Almada advances with its own ordinary roofs. You are visiting kin to weigh distance with your body, not with a map. On the crossing, you inventory hours. How long a favor takes to travel over water. How long a message. How quickly help can remember which door is yours. The ferryman talks to the river in grunts and small blessings. The boat replies with the old creak that means everything is fine. You breathe with them. Distance turns honest on rivers. Kin meet you with the praise of food. A fig that decided to be generous. A cup that remembers coolness. They offer opinions you did not request and refuse to regret them. You listen kindly and let their suggestions join the rest on the shelf, labeled good ideas that live elsewhere. The ferry schedule rings a quiet bell in your head. Promises that depend on tide keep their own counsel. You visit a cousin with hands dyed by walnut hulls who can mend anything. She would make a fine madrina, and she knows it. Her house smells of wood smoke and ambition. You measure the time between your door and hers, the bend in the lane that steals minutes, the late boat when wind is sulking. You translate the distance into fever nights and shoe mornings. The arithmetic prefers the near. On the way back, the boat sits lower with afternoon errands. The ferryman's hat has opinions about shade he does not share. You pass a barge stacked with barrels, each one a reason to be patient. You decide Almada will be a guest at your table often, and a joy at feast days, and not a cushion your child must sit on. Nearness is a kind of virtue. Today it wins. Stone greets your feet with its familiar grammar. The lane holds your shadow the way it always has without comment. You put the ferry salt on your tongue and let it teach the lesson again. Promises must be able to walk. You sit with a scrap of cloth and a needle because thinking behaves better when hands are busy. The thread moves, and you picture years the way a tailor pictures seams. A sponsor's name touches shoes in school and the small matter of dignity, the kind that fits a child like a well-cut sleeve. Not grandeur, just a path that does not trip. You add up the future in items that do not frighten a purse, winter stockings that do not bully toes, a slate and chalk that do not wander off, a little book of hours borrowed often enough to feel owned, a ribbon that keeps its place at feast days, a tiny dowry later, perhaps not coins, perhaps a trunk that smells of cedar and care. You prefer futures made of many small stitches over one loud knot. You test each chosen name against this long cloth. Beatriz, her ledger, has never shouted. She would notice shoes before pride can pretend not to. Juan, his hands understand repair, and repaired things teach hope. Maria, her door, teaches children how to stand in a threshold and not fear either side. None of them is a purse. All of them are hands. Rain threatens without committing. You like that. Ambition that sprinkles is safer than ambition that floods. In your mind, you walk a child to the guild hall, to the quay, to the courtyard where a stew remembers to be ready at the right hour. A sponsor does not purchase these scenes. A sponsor rehearses them until they happen easily. You finish the hem and bite the thread, because teeth are the surest knife. You smooth the cloth and look at a future that does not need embroidery to be beautiful. Shoes, slate, ribbon, trunk, hands, letters, doors, patience. You put the cloth away and feel that the years have agreed to stand still long enough for you to catch up. You draw a circle on the table with a damp fingertip and watch it dry into decision. One sponsor is enough, the priest had said. Two may stand if they behave like one promise and not two performances. You listen for what the house wants, not breadth, strength. Two make sense if each holds a different rope, one tied to hours, one tied to errands. The names assemble in your chest without jostling. Beatriz has already said yes in a room that refuses drama. She will come early and leave late, and the hours in between will feel held. Juan remains a question that smells of pitch and steadiness. He is sometimes Tide's property, sometimes the lane's. The times he's home, he behaves like a wall that does not crack in rain. You try an arrangement where Beatriz stands on the left and Juan on the right, with you and the priest in between and the child in the middle where small things belong. You measure whether Maria's door must be named aloud. It does not. She will carry the promise alongside the promise without needing a place in the book. Circles know how to be larger than they look. You practice the many ways two can be one. One voice answering the priest, one pair of hands steadying a candle, one path walked from your door to the church as if the street itself prefers pairs. The circle feels small and strong, easy to carry, easy to set down where the years can find it again, without searching. You wipe the table and the circle vanishes the way good decisions do, not gone, simply part of the grain. You say the names once to the chair, once to the bread, once to the quiet. Everything in the room understands. You visit the clerk at his high desk, not to file anything, only to borrow his careful voice. He reads names as if releasing ships from their moorings, each letter pushed into water, each tilde and accent like small sails. You hand him a scrap with the names written as best you can. He spells them back to you, slow and correct, the way a good cook returns a borrowed pot cleaner than it arrived. He dips the quill and makes practice lines on the edge of scrap. Joan, with its patient tilde. Beatrice with its ending that behaves like a bell. Your own family name, unremarkable and therefore perfect. He writes the child's given name on a clean bit and lets you see how it will look when the page that matters receives it. The letters stand like good neighbors near, not crowding. You ask about the book and he smiles like a man who dusts it even when no one is watching. He shows you the page of last week, then hides it again because other people's vows are not yours to read. The leather smells of oil and quiet. The paper smells of starch and time. He promises to read aloud on the day, not to clarify for himself, but to let the room hear what it's joining. You thank him with a ribbon for his own book, and he pretends to be scolded by such luxury. Then he tucks it away very carefully. He suggests a time when the light falls kindly on the desk and the ink dries fast. You tuck that note into your pocket, where it will make friends with salt and beans. On your way out, you practice in your mouth, the way the names will sound when the priest's voice carries them. They feel clean on the tongue, the way water tastes after a long day. Your steps keep time with letters. The city's edges look neater than they did a moment ago. You find Juan at the quay, not mid-sail, not mid-story, mid-knot, which is better. He takes his time finishing the turn and tucking the end, because half-done knots trouble a man's sleep. You greet him with the ceremony you reserve for bread, simple and certain. He sets the rope down, wipes his hands on a rag that used to be a shirt, and listens without decorating the silence. You ask as plainly as you know how, if it suits your hours and the wind does not make other claims, will you stand with us at the font and keep your name beside ours in the old way? He considers in the manner of a man who counts weather as well as days. He asks the hour, you tell him. He asks whether there is a second sponsor. You tell him there is and say her name. He nods, liking the balance. He offers you nothing heavy. No speeches, no cargo of promises shaped like barrels. He says he will come early, wear clean cuffs, stand where told, and afterward, see if any door in your stair prefers not to stick. He suggests that if the river borrows him soon after, he will leave a word with Beatrice and with Maria's doorway, so the house always has more than one route to him. This is humility dressed as logistics, and you approve. You hand him a small taper and a heel of bread, token for token. He holds them as if a church could be carried in a pocket for a while. He promises to bring only what can be eaten or burned, and to take nothing away but the name he will be given, and the work it asks for. The river lifts its voice, as if to agree. You walk home feeling that the circle has learned to close without tightening. 2 sponsors, 1 promise. You test the shape against doorways and stairs. It fits everywhere. You take the tokens out into the day the way people carry letters visible enough to be honest, modest enough to be safe. For Beatrice, a loaf still singing under cloth, a taper that will keep watch if asked, a ribbon for a page. For Juan, the same, because symmetry helps rooms breathe. You add a pinch of salt wrapped in paper for each, because kitchens understand vows. At Beatrice's door, you do not make a speech. You set the loaf where a loaf likes to land and say only that the morning is chosen, and her place in it is the left side of the font. She accepts with a nod that fits every kindness in her house. She tucks the salt into a jar without looking pleased with herself. The jar is pleased enough for 2. At the quay, you find Juano's eyes before his hands, because eyes can travel farther. He takes the small parcel and looks relieved that it is not a chest. He promises again to arrive early and to leave late enough to mend a latch, if a latch gets ideas. He does not try to hand anything back to even the scores. You are grateful. You would have had to refuse. On the way home, you pass Maria's courtyard and leave a little folded note, no secrets. Only the hour, because doors deserve warning. She will pretend not to have received it, and then appear at the right time with a bowl and a solution to a problem you had not yet solved. That is her art. You have kept the promises light. Nothing that can yank later. You like the way the parcels looked in your hands. Ordinary, edible, flammable. This is how vows should travel. Gossip spreads its nets at corners and fountains. You walk as if the meshes were made of lace, easy to admire, easier to avoid. Someone asks brightly whether you will pick cousin so-and-so. Someone else wonders aloud if a certain widow might be too busy to stand still. You answer with weather and bread and the delight of lemons. You do not answer with names. You practice the art of gratitude that does not wound. When a neighbor presents herself backward through compliments, you offer her a chair and then an errand. Would she lend her voice to a lullaby next week when the house is learning its new hour? People who wanted a stage often accept a task and like themselves better for it. Nets become ribbons when given jobs. At the fountain, two friends discuss abundance as if it were mercy. You prefer mercy shaped like punctuality. You nod at both. Pour water carefully so the splash does not show off, and let them keep their theories. Your circle is already closed. It simply does not feel a need to be announced. You visit the priest once more, brief as a breath, to confirm the hour and to thank him for reading slowly. He approves of slowness as if you had praised his mother. He warns you gently that sometimes a cousin arrives with a complicated face. He recommends bread and a seat and a sentence that uses no adjectives. You memorize it. We are grateful for your kindness. The circle is small this time. By dusk, the nets have tired themselves into threads. The lane smells of stew pots and soap. You thread the needle the city hands you and stitch the day closed, one small seam. No one feels excluded who was not trying to feel that way. You have not stepped on any toes, not even your own. You take a last walk by the docks, because decisions deserve fresh air before they set. Pitch warms on the pilings. Resin perfumes the evening in a way that forgives splinters. The river holds the day like a platter, balancing it without fuss. Men splice rope with the same attention you give to hems. Gulls heckle and are ignored by professionals who learned long ago that weather is the only critic worth heeding. You choose a post at the edge where the quay begins to think about becoming water, and you stand there with your hands quiet, letting the tide do the speaking. A cart argues gently with the cobbles. A bell aboard a small boat clears its throat, then minds itself. The wind is a house guest with good manners. You say the names to the river, first softly, then as if reading them from a page. They travel, flatten, and return in a calmer tone. No echo troubles you. The choice lies down beside the tide and refuses to roll. A barrel slides into a hold with two shouts and one grunt. The rope lowers it like a respectful argument that ends before anyone is offended. What might have splashed does not. Quiet returns, which is your favorite part of any effort. Work done, noise gone, hands idle without guilt. The light finds the metal rings along the quay and turns them into small moons. The water tries them on and decides the fit is good. On the far side, a priest crosses with a page, protected inside his book as if sky could stain ink. He nods with the self-possession of a man whose work thrives at dawn. You think of his careful voice and of letters landing on their feet. You do not stop him. Blessings should not be wasted on evenings that already know how to be gentle. A swallow writes a quick sentence under the eaves and ends it with a neat turn. You borrow its punctuation for your thoughts. A woman you know from the net sheds sits on a coil and mends a float line, teeth holding the bitter end, fingers arguing kindly with knots. She does not ask what brings you here. The posture of someone rehearsing calm is answer enough. You borrow her patience by watching. Each knot is a promise. Each splice a proof that a break is not the end of a line's usefulness. When she bites the thread, she smiles at no one in particular, and you smile back for the pleasure of a neat finish. She tests the length with a tug that is not a boast, only respect, then lets it coil itself like a well-fed snake and moves on to the next. Children conduct experiments with gravity, shells, and time. Pebbles become prayers hurled at tomorrow. Most land in today with admirable accuracy. A dog bargains with a wave and loses, but accepts the result without litigation. A carpenter's mallet speaks low to a plank and gets its way. You count the ordinaries. 6 hammers that refuse to hurry. 3 voices that prefer speaking sideways. 1 bell that clears its throat and goes quiet again. Nothing here asks for spectacle. Everything here asks for steadiness. The river says its 3 words: arrive, withdraw, return, until even your breathing copies them without being told. You sit on a crate and let water be the clock. If you were superstitious, you would collect 100 signs. A knot that refuses to slip, a swallow choosing the same beam twice, a wind that remembers your hair is not a banner. You are not superstitious. You are patient. You wait until your chest keeps time with the slow lift and settle against the pilings, and then you listen again for doubt. None comes. The names feel like tools you have used for years, but oiled today. A fisherman wipes his hands and leaves 2 clean dark prints on his trousers like stamps, declaring the parcel delivered. Joan passes along the quay with a coil on his shoulder. He sets it down and shapes it into a circle that lies obedient as a sleeping cat. He checks the tuck without looking around to see who might be impressed. You admire the absence of theater. A padrino who minds his knots will mind his promises. He glances up, nods the small nod reserved for neighbors and tides, and moves on in the tempo of weather. Beatriz is nowhere near water at this hour, but her room travels with you. The chair that holds its guests, the ledger that writes bread and oil in letters big enough for dim days, the beeswax that teaches wood to remember kindness. Maria's courtyard arrives too. The heel cut for a boy who pretended not to be hungry. The oil pooled nearest his reach. The salt shaken like a small benediction. You test the question of nets and news. Someone will ask tomorrow whether you chose, and someone will pretend to know before asking. You practice replies that feel true without becoming a speech. We chose a quiet morning, you will say. We chose people who arrive early and leave late. We chose hands that already know the work. Such sentences carry the river's flavor. Simple, salty, finished. Lamplighters begin their slow jurisdiction. Each wick learns its job in one breath. Light on water keeps polite company with the first stars. You give the quay 2 more minutes because you like the number, and then you stand. Resin rides your clothes as a portable yes. You look once toward the mouth where the day goes to tell the sea what it learned, and you let it go. The walk home takes the side streets that remember your feet. Doorways gossip about supper and decide everyone is eating well enough. A cat becomes a question mark, and then an exclamation at a fishbone. A shutter closes itself with courtesy. By the time you reach your stair, you have forgotten to rehearse anything. The body recognizes a finished task. The mind falls in line. Inside, the house breathes you in and agrees with the resin and rope. You lay a hand on the table as if it were a forehead to be checked for fever, and feel only the cool of wood. You fetch the scrap that carries the hour and tuck it under the candle holder where decisions sleep well. The room answers by arranging its edges, 1 cup on its hook, 1 bowl nested into another, 1 chair pushed in with the soft sound of readiness. You wash your hands. They smell of river and bread in equal parts. You say the names once more, but you say them the way you say good night, to walls that have earned it. They do not echo. They take their places. Outside, the river continues its lesson for anyone who still needs it. You let the lesson proceed without you, and turn toward the ordinary kindness of soup, a folded cloth, and a lamp trimmed for the hour, when stories choose to rest. You set an evening table that understands the concept of blessing. Soup that forgives second helpings. Bread that agrees to be torn. A small dish of almonds that clink politely. The room smells of simmered onion and patient oil. The lamp keeps a low, reasonable halo over everything that matters and nothing that doesn't. Chairs remember knees. The window remembers how to admit air without admitting weather. You lay spoons where hands expect to find them, and invite the house to be itself. Family arrives with faces softened by ordinary hunger. They bring weather on their sleeves and advice in their pockets. A cousin kisses the air near your cheek and claims the spot where he can see the pot best. An aunt examines plates as if they were letters from a distant friend. Someone asks if you salted the water like sense requires. Someone else wonders whether the oil is too fine for a weekday. You answer everyone without answering anyone. The ladle finds bowls. Steam writes brief messages in the air and lets them vanish. You keep the meal simple so the evening will be simple. A thread of parsley. A squeeze of lemon that wakes the tongue without lecturing it. A handful of chickpeas that do their steady work. The first bites quiet the room, as first bites should. Then talk begins to flex its fingers. Who will stand at the font? An uncle asks, as if asking about tides. Before you reply, an aunt suggests a name bright as polished brass. A woman who keeps a chest for dowry bits and never lets ribbon lose its pride. Your spoon holds its pace. Brass belongs on doors more than promises. A cousin floats a sailor with handsome stories and a swagger the size of a sail. He can lift a barrel by himself, she adds, as if lifting barrels were a sacrament. You remember the river's schedule and let the suggestion drift. The meal keeps you grounded. The fish is tender now. The olive pits clink modestly in the bowl meant for them. You slice bread with the carefulness you reserve for statements you do not plan to repeat. The room makes it easy to prefer steadiness over shine. Your mother's sister folds her hands in the particular way that introduces a favor, disguised as wisdom. She speaks of keeping choices in the family, a phrase that wears nice shoes. Blood binds, she says, and you nod because blood binds wounds, and that is a good thing. But ropes can tangle if too many hands pull at once. You smile toward your bowl and keep your list where it lives inside the calm you carried home from the priest's porch. The soup breathes quietly. The lamp approves without flicker. A nephew, clever and unpracticed, proposes a sponsor with a purse heavy enough to tilt the table. He imagines shoes that never need mending and ribbons that volunteer to adorn themselves. You give him the kindness of attention and then the equal kindness of a different subject. The weather on the hill. Bread that rose when the oven sulked. The priest who still reads slowly. Luxury sighs and returns to its corner without sulking. Someone laughs. No one argues. Stories appear like small, harmless waves. Someone remembers a christening where the godfather arrived with 3 musicians and left with half the almonds compliments of himself. The table laughs in the manner of people who would like the world to be a stage if the stage would sweep itself. You pour a little more oil into the dish, not as a flourish, but because bread prefers it. You keep your voice unadorned. We prefer a quiet morning, you say, as if remarking on dew. The sentence lands without noise and does its work anyway. Talk circles back, as talk does. A cousin proposes a bargain hiding inside a blessing. This man will stand if later you remember his daughter when shoes are counted. You spread a small circle of oil on your bread and let the sentence pass like a procession seen from an upper window, pretty, distant, irrelevant to the room where soup steams. You remember the midwife's warning about the anchor disguised as a gift. Your hands remain gentle. Your face remains calm. Your father's brother mentions a widow who has kept a door open for others longer than anyone remembers. His eyes find you because he knows what you value. You do not move faster or slower. You ask whether anyone wants more olives. You refill cups. The room changes a degree toward your weather. Your list, inside you, lays one name on the table without showing itself. The quiet feels like a good sign, the kind that does not need to be pointed at. Salt settles into the fish. Lemon bowls are a little empty in the way that pleases cooks. Talk softens into errands that make houses run, whose roof wants attention before the rains. Whether the ferryman is coughing less, which cousin's child pronounces letters like coins and which like rain. When the circle of advice returns a third time, it has lost its banners. Will you tell us when you've told them? Someone asks, and you say yes. The yes is not a door to more discussion. It is a folded blanket set aside. After the bowls are empty, the table discovers almonds. Their quiet crack convinces everyone to talk softly, the way shells teach hands to be careful. You pass the small wine. Glasses kiss the wood with the humility of people who know what wine can do and choose what it should do tonight. Warm the throat, loosen the corners of the mouth, invite a nap later. A candle sputters once, remembers its manners, and resumes its steady breath. Chairs push back with soft goodnights. The stair counts each tread. When the house is quiet again, you sit with your list, which you do not unfold. It does not need unfolding. It has become part of the table the way oil becomes part of wood after years of being set down gently. You touch the back of the chair where your aunt had rested her hand. and feel only wood, not direction. You trim the wick while it is warm and set it ready for morning. Your breath is even. Your hands smell faintly of lemon and linen. The night closes itself, and so does the choice. Night prayer prefers few words and rooms that keep them. You sit where the house sends its best quiet. The lamp keeps a modest ring of honey on the table. Outside, the lane reduces itself to soft footsteps and a shudder deciding to be done. You place both hands flat, feel the grain, and let your shoulders tell your jaw that it has nothing to guard. Names rise like sparrows and settle again when called gently. You speak the child's name first, then Beatrice, then Juan, separated by breaths. The air holds them without reshaping them. You add two small words that feel good in the mouth. Keep, steady. You ask for doors that open when knocked, for feet that find the church without stumbling, for a page that dries quickly and keeps its ink, for the kind of nap that arrives after soup on a day that mattered. You do not bargain. You do not invent holy reasons for ordinary hopes. You rest your forehead in your palm long enough for thought to cool, and let your other hand straighten the small things within reach. The stub of charcoal where it won't leave a mark, the ribbon set so its tails are even, the salt folded so it will not escape before it is invited. The room answers by becoming plainer. Shadows learn their corners and stay there. The kettle accepts that it has worked enough. A late cart apologizes in wood and iron and moves on. Far off, the river practices the same three words it has always known and lets you borrow them without fee. You take them into your breathing. Arrive. Withdraw. Return. You discover you have been using them all day. You think of Beatrice trimming a wick for the neatness of it, of Joan testing a knot for the truth of it, of Maria setting oil where small fingers can reach. You do not rehearse the morning. It has been rehearsing itself in you for days. You do not dress the future in fancy fabric. It owns good linen already. You fold gratitude until it is small enough to carry in a sleeve. You forgive the house for every creak it has ever made, and thank it for the ones that warned you where to step. You blow the lamp, trim the wick while it is warm, and set it ready. Darkness arrives like a careful cat felt before it is seen. Cloth remembers coolness and gives it back. From the street, a voice speaks two friendly syllables and is answered by a door. You lie down with your hand on the place where the list sleeps under the plate and feel no need to touch it. The names continue working without you. They know their jobs now. Your last thought is not a sentence. It is a small, satisfied weight settling. The birth room welcomes steam and firmness. Water warms in a pot that murmurs without gossip. Cloths wait folded in the order you like. Small, smaller, smallest. The midwife arranges the space the way a sailor arranges deck. Nothing where a foot will look for ground. She speaks only to the air, which listens. A window open the width of one finger persuades the room to breathe, but not chatter. The table keeps its corner. The chair refuses to wobble. The hour clears its throat and decides to be kind. You do your part. Breathe, rest, take broth, hold the rim of the basin as if it were the horizon. The world narrows to the task that built the whole world. Names hover near the ceiling like patient swallows. Beatrice's hand is already on the latch of any door that might misbehave. Maria hums three notes that remind the house which key it belongs in. Joan paces the stair like a man rehearsing calm. Each step has learned his weight and chooses not to complain. The midwife's hands smell of fennel and soap. Her eyes refuse drama and prefer timing. Work begins the way. Rain begins. A short opinion, then a longer one, then the weather that matters. You are not afraid of it. You have done smaller versions every day. Lifting, lowering, steadying, letting go. The midwife names nothing aloud. She lets the room do the naming. When cloth is wanted, cloth appears. When water needs to be water, no one tries to make it wine. Someone sets a candle where shadows were thinking of gathering. It learns its job in one breath and does it. Between efforts, the room admits small mercies. A sip of warm broth wanders where it is needed and stays to help. The window allows a gull to sign its name and then go about its business. The midwife sets a cool cloth in your palm and lets your palm tell your face what to do with it. She keeps the floor free of words that are not helpful. If anyone prays, it is with shoulders and breath. Time stretches the way. Linen stretches only as much as it can and still be linen. When the hour reaches out a hand, you take it. Work finishes with the dignity work deserves. A small cry stitches the air to itself, like a bell, realizing it has always been a bell. The room holds still in the exact right way. No clapping, no speeches, only the business of welcome. Water cools to the kindness it was meant to keep. The cloths prove their training. A name drops from the ceiling and lands where it belongs. It does not even need to be said yet. It understands its task and waits politely for the book. Beatrice's eyes shine in the particular way. That means a room has done something right. Maria persuades the kettle to think about tea without bragging to anyone about the idea. Joan takes 3 steps backward down the stair, as if surrendering the floor to better experts, and then returns with the sensible question a house loves to hear. What else? The midwife answers by moving a chair, which is a kind of speaking. You sleep because sleeping has become an errand with your name on it. Outside, the city agrees to tiptoe. Inside, the room remembers everything you taught it about calm and gives it back with interest. Morning wears the color of pewter turned friendly. Cobblestones keep last night's cool. Sandals respect it. You tie your cloak with the knot you trust and step into a street that has put its noise away for later. Swallows scratch neat parentheses in the sky. Laundry lines hold their breath. The sponsors arrive before their shadows have decided what to do with themselves. Beatrice, with a folded cloth and a look that means the kettle is already thinking about boiling. Joan, with clean cuffs and empty hands that are ready to be useful. Maria appears at the stair pretending she had business elsewhere and presses a small flask of water into your palm, as if ideas were heavy and needed ballast. You all begin the route you have practiced in your head. Past the fig tree that keeps its opinions, past the wall that remembers 1,000 elbows, past the window where a cat has invented its own sainthood. The city gives you right of way without paperwork. Doors notice and then return to their errands. A woman sweeping her step pauses to tuck a strand of hair, the gesture that translates as blessings on this hill. Joan walks a half step behind as if guarding a cargo that is light but precious. Beatrice keeps to your left, the way she will keep to the left of the font, as if mornings themselves have a proper arrangement. You feel the hour fitting around you like a well-cut garment, no tug, no slack. The air tastes faintly of yeast from early ovens. Somewhere, a brazier makes a polite argument with damp charcoal. When you reach the square, the church sits in its usual patience, stone considering sunlight, porch holding a pocket of cool. A swallow slips inside and scribbles once under the arch, then thinks better of it. You touch the jam with your fingers, not out of superstition, only gratitude for wood that remembers welcomes. The priest is already halfway between shade and light, reading with the posture of a man who refuses to wake his book too quickly. He sees you, closes the page with 2 careful fingers, and lets the bench offer you its best curve. There is no committee, no rustle of papers, only a nod that means the hour is as ready as you are. He asks the simplest questions, the ones that confirm what has already become true. Names are spoken softly to practice their edges. You hear them take their places in the day, the way chairs find their legs on uneven stone. Inside, the nave receives you with the politeness of stone that has heard every kind of vow and chooses not to rank them. Beeswax keeps a low sweetness at floor level. Old lime remembers cool caves. Your steps knit a quiet seam up the aisle. Joan notices a hinge that clears its throat and oils it with a thumb dipped in habit. Beatrice adjusts the fold of her cloth where it will be needed in a moment and not before. Maria drifts to a side aisle to tidy a candle that felt ambitious and now feels corrected. You stand near the font while the priest lets the silence reach the right depth. The silver rim keeps its winter. The water keeps its river. A window line of light chooses the stone beside your foot and stays there as if saving you a place. You look once toward the door and see the square behaving itself. 2 boys moving a bucket as if it contained news. A baker's apprentice carrying a board of small loaves that breathe like kittens. A cat refusing to learn anyone's rules. Everything in its ordinary size. Nothing asking for trumpets. The priest's voice sets the room's tempo. He reads your names as if pouring water from a good jug, slow enough not to spill, sure enough not to hesitate. You breathe with the words. Beatrice places her hand where steadiness belongs. Joan watches the flame on a nearby taper, and moves his body so the draft will leave it in peace. You do not think about almonds or wine or who will ask what afterward. You think about the small clock of breath that runs in your arms, and the larger clock of the city that chooses, for this hour, to tick quietly. It is not yet the moment of water. Preparation is its own sacrament. A page made ready to receive ink, a wick trimmed to avoid smoke, a cloth set within the reach of a hand that will not fumble. The priest glances once toward the book. The clerk, who has come without announcing himself, has already opened to a clean place. He wets the nib and writes a practice line on scrap, a private rehearsal for the letters that will matter. The scratch is soft as moth wings. You feel the room recognize itself. Not a stage, not a tribunal. A workshop for promises. Tools sit where they should. Font, oil, salt, book, hands. The child shifts. Voices smile without sound. Breath steadies. If there were a hinge in the air, you would say it has been oiled. The priest looks at you with the unhurried assurance of someone who has learned the art of letting words be heavier than his presence. Are you ready? He asks. And you are, as ready as bread is when it stops pretending and rises. You nod. You place your feet where the floor suggests, and the others find their marks without being told. The morning leans in, the way a friend leans, not to eavesdrop, only to be near. The first syllable of prayer begins to gather itself like a drop rounding on the lip of a pitcher. You feel the house you left behind, its cooled lamp, its folded cloth standing politely in the back row of the nave, approving. A swallow draws a final small loop and departs through the high window, punctual as a bell. The font's silver rim is cool, the water cool in a way that persuades rather than shocks. The priest's hand moves like a slow clock, one that refuses to lose or gain. Words fall into place with soft clicks, as if a careful locksmith were at work inside the morning. Oil's scent arrives like a thin memory of gardens, green folded into gold. Salt waits in a small dish, tidy and patient, a teacher of the tongue's first lesson about the world's flavor. The child's breath gathers, hesitates, finds itself again, and the little surprised sound travels through stone warm as bread. Beatrice stands, as if guarding a sleeping room from noise. Her cloth is more than cloth. A plan, a readiness, a promise that small water will not become a draft. When the priest looks for the right angle of light, she shifts without rustle to lend it. Joan stands as if keeping a ship steady at dock, feet having memorized the floor in one glance, hands making themselves into all the things hands must sometimes be: perch, wall, bridge, bowl. Maria takes one polite step nearer the side aisle candle and lowers her voice until the flame, too, learns to whisper. The prayer is not long, but it is patient. It keeps company with the child's breath, instead of asking the breath to keep company with it. The name is spoken carefully, as though the ink had already dried and only the air were catching up. You hear it as if for the first time, and also as if it had been waiting behind the wall for years, ready to come when called. The syllables do not perform. They sit down where they belong. The water lifts and returns, lifts and returns. A tiny river makes and remakes its sentence. You are named, you are kept, you are welcome. Oil traces a sign that feels like the unlocking of a small door behind the forehead. Salt touches the tongue and startles without scolding. The child registers every lesson at once and chooses the simplest response. A blink that looks like recognition. Around you, stone keeps a cool applause, no hands, only a sense that something has landed with sound craftsmanship. The book waits on the desk like a calm harbor. The clerk, who prides himself on reading aloud as if teaching letters how to behave, sets the nib and writes with the modesty of rain. Joanno's tilde gets its roof. Beatrice's final letter rings like a bell. Your own family name takes its usual shape, neither embarrassed nor proud. The page accepts it all without argument. Ink darkens, then settles. The priest reads what now exists, and lets the room hear its own work. This is the only parade the hour wants. Words walking from mouth to ear at a pace that allows every foot to find a stone. You notice the small chorus of physical things agreeing. Flame steady, water unspilled. Cloth exactly wet enough, salt not wandering. The child sighs and finds the rhythm everyone else has already chosen. In that sigh, You feel rooms rearrange themselves over years to come, chairs that will be pulled forward at the right times, door latches that will learn to lift noiselessly at night, shoes that will remember the path to this porch without instruction. Compadrio announces itself not by trumpets, but by chores that begin to volunteer. The priest closes the book with the contentment of a craftsman whose tools have behaved. He does not look toward the doorway to see who saw. He looks toward your faces to make sure the promises understood themselves. They did. Beatriz folds her cloth as if folding a sentence. Joan takes a second to adjust the hinge he had already adjusted, just in case it wanted a bit more kindness. Maria straightens a taper for her own satisfaction, and pretends not to be pleased with the way the morning has minded its matters. You do not think about almonds yet. You do not think about anything but the next right action. A drop of water, late to the event, slides along the rim like punctuation and lands where Beatriz expects it. The priest gives a blessing, compact enough to be carried home with bread. You receive it as if tucking a coin into your hem. The knave releases you without sighing. Outside, light has decided to be generous, but not fierce. The square waits with the patience of stone that knows families will always need somewhere to stand and pass a dish back and forth. You look once at the font before you turn. It looks back without drama, like a friend who keeps a shop and will be here tomorrow at the same hour, ready to let words become water and water become belonging. You nod to it the way you might to a good neighbor. Then you step into the porch where dust makes a net and catches light like small fish, and the morning expands around you without a sound. Outside, the square remembers how to be a square. The light is brighter, but not curious. It does not pry. You pass a dish of almonds hand to hand, little boats of sweetness that arrive without drums, crunching softly as if they had trained for years to be agreeable. Someone pours a finger of wine and calls it enough. Bread appears in the correct amount for happiness, and no more. A child in another family practices his vowels at a volume that flatters the day. No one minds. Stairs learn the new traffic of congratulations that are really errands disguised as sentences. Neighbors offer blessings shaped like work. A woman promises an hour next week to sit while you sleep, and you feel sleep move closer in gratitude. A boy offers to carry a message to the guild hall whenever needed, and looks taller for having said so. A cousin with good shoes offers to walk the child along the market row someday and teach the honest prices of lemons. These gifts weigh less than adjectives and last longer. Maria, who pretends to dislike organizing, nevertheless organizes plates, so no one must think about plates. Beatrice reads the room the way she reads a ledger, and quietly gathers cups that are done being cups. Joan oils a hinge because the hinge sighed at him in a private language. You do not make toasts. You make introductions name to hand to name, so later the street will already know what to call itself when it comes to your door. The priest, refusing to be honored larger than necessary, accepts a loaf the way a river accepts a small branch gracefully, without commentary. He is thanked as if he were a craftsman who had repaired something quietly and correctly, which he is. He leaves before anyone can install him at the head of a table he does not want. Children invent games with the pebbles that border the church wall. One draws a circle with his heel and calls it the world. Another steps in and announces herself bishop and then baker without changing position. You admire their early grasp of office. A dog in the sun reconsiders a nap and decides in favor. The lamp in the porch resigns its jurisdiction gracefully to daylight. You taste almond, bread, the faint metallic ghost of the font still on your fingers. Everything feels correctly portioned. News tries to turn itself into gossip, but fails in this weather. A woman begins, "Did you hear?" and ends, "that the ferryman's cough is better," which is the best kind of failure. A man introduces his opinion and then forgets it, distracted by the way sunlight praises the edge of a loaf. These are friendly errors. You let them go on happening around you like bees that have chosen civility. Your concern is a different grammar. Who needs what when? Which feet should arrive where? Which voices will help a door remember to open softly? Married to smallness, joy becomes durable. You notice it perched on the rim of a cup, tucked into the pocket where you keep a scrap of ribbon, dozing on a cat's whisker. It does not insist. It sits where you will see it when the room's chores pause. You feel the new kinship settle like a lightweight cloak across shoulders that did not want fur or gold, but appreciate warmth. Godparents exist now, in more than ink. They exist in how chairs will be pulled forward and in which footsteps will climb stairs at dusk without being announced by a knock. Compadrio, the old word, breathes quietly and begins to mean a schedule. When the almonds are nearly gone, conversation lowers to the pitch that invites naps. The very best celebrations aim there. Eyes a little heavy, hands sticky with honeyed dust, mouths grateful for stillness. You see a neighbor tuck 2 almonds into a pocket for a child who fell asleep before he could have any. No one will call it theft. Everyone will call it sense. You thank the sponsors with the only speeches that suit them short, made of verbs. Thank you for standing. Thank you for arriving early. Thank you for staying late. Beatrice answers with a nod that has the weight of a seal. John says, I'll come by the stair after the noon wind, which is not thanks, and therefore perfect thanks. Maria, who did not stand in the book, but stood in the day, presses a folded cloth into your hand with a look that reads, use this first and return it only when the house is no longer tired. The square yawns and returns to its usual employment, being a place for feet, voices, and weather to agree on terms. You gather the last cups, sweep a handful of crumb from a bench, and feel the hour sign its name and file itself. Nothing grand has taken place, which is what makes the bond strong. You are ready to go home not because the day is over, but because it has found its correct size. Afternoon folds the city into gentler corners. Heat becomes suggestion rather than argument. Shutters approve by half closing. You sit where the room keeps its breeze and watch new threads catch quiet, bright, practical. A sponsor's name appears in a sentence that means help. A doorway is remembered by feet without thinking. A promise begins to behave like a habit. Compadrio pulls up a chair, not to lecture, only to take notes for the years. You pour water in a thin line and listen to it say what you have been learning. Steady, steady, steady. You imagine the calendar ahead, not as a wall of saints in procession, but as a table of errands with good legs. A christening remembered by a visit when fever puts its hand on a forehead. A feast day marked by a ribbon in a book rather than smoke in a street. A birthday that asks for shoes and gets them, not because anyone is rich, but because several hands have decided to be in the same place at once. You see Beatrice arriving with something in a basket that refuses to introduce itself. You see Joan fixing a latch that had intended to become a problem. You see Maria pouring oil into a dish, with the precise amount that makes bread comfortable with itself. You picture the child learning the geography of these chairs and doorways, which steps creak permission, which elbows on which walls are maps, which names open their palms without counting the coins inside. The book at the parish desk has done its work. The ink will keep its color, but the real register is being written in the grain of wood and the worn patches on thresholds. You think of the font's silver rim and feel a small coolness pass through the room, as if the water had taught the air how to behave. You do not make vows to the future heavier than the ones already made. You set out a plate for evening and include one more slice than you might need. You glance at the stair in case a step decides to remember a friend. You put a cloth by the door where hands can find it in the dark. Quiet arrangements. That is the shape of this bond. No parade, no anthem, just readiness practiced. Until it looks like instinct. The child sleeps, as is fashionable after ceremony. You watch the rise and fall and copy it until you are no longer thinking about copying it. You close your eyes and see the porch netting sunlight. The priest's measured hand. The tiny river the font briefly became. On another day, this memory will come on its own, unasked, to help with a shoe or a lesson or a fever or a sorrow that does not need words. You let it build itself a chair in the corner. Evening brings its civilized noises. A cart that has learned diplomacy. A gull too polite to scream. A neighbor humming the part of a hymn no one minds hearing twice. You answer none of them. You cut bread with unshowy satisfaction. The knife moves like a sentence with sensible punctuation. You pour a thimble of wine and let it teach your mouth how to say thanks without sound. What began as choosing has become belonging. You realize the work is over, not because the day has ended, but because the house has absorbed it and no longer needs to talk about it. You pull the shutters a hand's breadth and admire how the room looks in its new quiet. Names sit where names should sit, like useful jars on a shelf, near enough to reach without standing on a stool, far enough not to fall when the table is bumped. You place your palm flat on the wood, and the wood answers with a calm that feels older than your own calm, and not at all tired of lending it out. You do not rehearse tomorrow. Tomorrow will rehearse itself. You will hear a knock that means, I am here because we said we would be here. You will see footsteps that remember which stair objects to, and how to step where it does not. You will find that time kindly has folded the morning into the afternoon until they are both the same sentence. You blow the lamp later than usual only because you enjoy the way the flame learns to bow. When darkness arrives, it brings nothing to prove. Night gathers carefully, as if not to wake the floor. The house lowers its shoulders. Linen takes the shape of a body that has been carrying names and can now let them carry back. You lie still and watch the last crumbs of light lose interest in the wall. Air settles. A swallow somewhere writes one soft line and folds its pen. You do not count anything. Counting belongs to afternoons. Nights prefer keeping. Breath becomes a small ferry carrying a quiet cargo from one side of you to the other. In its wake, the day unknots. The porch with its cool pocket, the silver rim of water, the priest's voice that refused to hurry, the cloth in Beatrice's hands, the hinge that sighed and was forgiven. Each memory steps into the dark like a guest who knows the house and does not need escort. The square empties itself without drama. Even the river sounds asleep, as if the tide had decided to move by thought. You place the names where sleep will find them easily. The child's first, then the sponsor's, one to each side of the pillow, then your own, folded small like a handkerchief. No speeches, just breath, like a modest bell that rings inward. Promise is not noisy. It is a chair pulled forward, a cup set within reach, a door that remembers to open. Let the room keep that lesson while you rest. Somewhere, a cart finishes apologizing and becomes silence. Somewhere, a candle approves of the wick you trimmed and dreams of tomorrow's small flame. Under your palm, the wood has the temperature of contentment. You let it be your weather. When sleep arrives, it does not ask for a story. It already knows one. Steady, steady, steady. It begins in a porch and ends in a room where morning will be patient again. We hope this glimpse into old customs has been a calm and pleasant one. If it made you curious for more, you can like, share, or leave a kind comment. And if you wish, subscribe to be here for the next unhurried tradition we explore together. End of script. Sweet dreams.